Let's start with a simple question. What are states of consciousness? Well, in short, they're whatever you're feeling right now. And depending on what you've been up to for the last little while, this could include a range of experiences, from basic emotions to a flow experience, or maybe a drug-induced drowsiness, or a meditative oneness, like the great contemplative traditions describe. Pretty straightforward, huh? Well, sure, but there's more. Consider states in relation to the levels or structures explored in the previous lesson. You've seen how consciousness develops through levels of increasing complexity. Well, how then does consciousness also show up in states? Used in this particular sense, consciousness refers to your upper left quadrant dimension. And depending on how exactly you view that dimension, you'll discover either structures or states of consciousness. So what's the difference? The short answer is as follows. Structures need to be inferred or deduced, whereas states are felt or apprehended directly. To uncover structures in yourself, you need to know what they look like from a third-person analytical perspective because that's the only way they show up. Combine your understanding of structures with a sense of your past developmental history, then compare all of that to your present experience. Finally, you can then infer or deduce a fairly decent sense of your current structure. With states, however, none of this is required. You don't need an analytical perspective to know how you're feeling. To discover if you're happy, anxious, relaxed, drunk, aroused, or feeling one with God, a simple first-person sense of your own interior is all you need. This is to say that states of consciousness are given, or they're available to you in a direct manner. Not true with structures of consciousness, which again need to be looked at and investigated rather than felt directly. Consider a metaphor concerning two ways to view a painting. You can look at a painting and immediately see the play of colors and tones. These would be like states, in that they're elements that you are directly in touch with. An analog to structures, on the other hand, would be viewing a painting in hope of inferring the pattern and nature of techniques employed by the painter. To get a sense of the complexity beneath the colors, you need to know a thing or two about art history and painting, or see many different paintings painted at different times by the same painter. So, are you starting to get a taste of this? If not, don't worry, because as you've come to expect, we're going to look much deeper in a moment. States are the first element of AQUIL that we'll explore, which you experience directly via a first-person perspective. With other elements, we've relied more so on third-person oriented descriptions before attempting to locate them in your awareness. In this lesson, the order is reversed, and as such, states have an entirely different feel to them, one which may make them appear easier to access and understand intuitively. We all experience various states of consciousness, and they often provide us with profound motivation, meaning, and drive. Think of the many aha experiences of brilliantly creative insight that you've had. What if you could tap into these whenever you needed for intense problem solving? What about the less exciting but just as powerful states of joy and sorrow? Consider how often you experience those or similar emotions, how often they change, and how often they affect us and those with whom we interact. States of consciousness are describing realities available in your awareness right now, and you'd better notice them quickly because they're bound to change and change often. From anxiety to motivation, waking to dreaming, meditative to drug-induced euphoria, all of these are states, and we're immersed in their vast array of phenomenal experience for the majority of our lives. This is why the integral map takes them into account, and why it guides you to discover the territory of experience you may not have even suspected was there. And it's also why we'll offer you the tools to understand and navigate them. Unlike structures of consciousness, which are generally permanent acquisitions, states of consciousness are usually temporary. They're present for a bit, and then they pass. Despite seeming more commonplace than structures, understanding, applying, and recognizing states has many profound benefits as well. This lesson will explore each of these in greater depth, so just an overview for now. A deeper understanding of your emotional states can help you be less gripped by strong emotions, making you more open and flexible in the moment. And you can learn how to better work with common negative emotions by owning what's yours and not projecting your unwanted emotions onto others. Also, by understanding the nature of drug-induced, meditative, and spiritual states, you'll learn how exactly they affect you, what it is that you're experiencing, and ultimately how these experiences fit into your overall life experience. Next, an awareness of the interaction between states and structures explains even more deeply how and why people behave and believe in the ways that they do. And finally, by learning about states as stages of contemplative unfolding, you'll discover the path toward waking up from this phenomenal world of suffering and exclusive identification with your ego. All of this and more from an element of the integral map which, at first glance, might not have seemed like much more than common emotions. Continue on, and you'll see states in all their rightful glory. Similar to all previous lessons, this one on states also features 3 distinct learning paths. The first concerns the theory of states. The second features an application of states, and the third is on awareness of states within you. If you're new to the concept of states, it might be helpful to engage the theory path first. If not, feel free once again to choose your own adventure.
As you've seen, states come in a variety of forms. They represent a vast array of experiences, which we don't want to overly limit by slapping a definition on them. But since we're in the theory path, this is exactly what we're here to do, hopefully, though, without being too constrictive. States are defined as temporary, fleeting aspects of phenomena. Why phenomena? Well, as you've come to expect by now, states don't just pertain to individuals. As such, this definition makes room for states in all quadrants. But, since we'll be focusing again on your upper left individual subjective awareness, states can be understood as any specific and temporary felt aspect of experience available in your immediate awareness. Before narrowing our exploration to this dimension, let's get a big picture view of states in all quadrants. Just like lines, levels, and types, states arise in all quadrants. While we typically associate states with our own felt experience, other quadrant phenomena experience temporary and fleeting states as well. Here's a few examples. In the upper left quadrant, all individuals experience waking, dreaming, and deep sleep states, as well as flow states, possible near-death experiences, meditative states, and moment-to-moment emotional states. In the lower left quadrant, we find shared emotional states between mother and child, shared emotional states between people at a rock concert, or between 2 friends or partners. Additionally, there are any number of larger group and cultural states such as mob mentality, mass hysteria, groupthink, and patriotism. In the upper right, there are an endless variety of physiological states such as brain states, hormonal states, and behavioral states. And in the lower right, there are states of systems. These include weather states, states of the economy, the state of various conflicts, and ecological states, such as the temporary and fleeting configuration of predator and prey relationships, or the health state of a watershed. Wow! States in all quadrants, states of mind, states of organisms, states of systems, and states of cultures. And as you've come to expect, since this course is about you, we'll focus our exploration on states in the upper left quadrant. Upper left states arise in several varieties. Taken together, we get a general cartography of individual state experiences, which include phenomenal states of mind, non-ordinary or altered states, and natural states. If these don't make sense at this time, we'll go through each of them in a moment. Each of these state categories adhere to a few general principles. First, states are temporary, meaning that most last anywhere from a few seconds to a few minutes to a few hours, and occasionally up to a few months. Next, states are typically exclusive. That is, states are discrete experiences, unlike levels, which include earlier capacities. States are typically distinct realms of experience which, when occurring, preclude experiences of another state in the same category. For example, you can't be drunk and sober, or waking and dreaming at the same time. Next, states are available regardless of an individual's level of development. No matter who you are or how far you've ascended up the spiral of development, you can experience almost any state in any category, with only a few exceptions. Finally, states themselves don't generally show development, meaning you don't need to learn to be happy before you gain the capacity to feel sadness. And you don't need to learn how to dream before you can enter deep, dreamless sleep. Each state, in this sense, is already available as a potential experience. There is, however, one exception to the rule of states not showing development. It concerns contemplative state stages, and we'll learn more about them later. Next, let's explore each category of states. Phenomenal states are the most prevalent and most fundamental aspect of your lived experience from moment to moment. You enter into and out of phenomenal states literally dozens of times through each and every day. This category includes the entire range of human emotion, from happy to sad, anxious to relaxed, angry to peaceful. Emotions are so prevalent that we might not at first consider them states. There are many schools of thought along with dozens of practices for working with your emotions. We won't go into those here. Suffice to point out that much of what they are dealing with is described by the category of phenomenal states. Another set of phenomenal states are that of insight and intuition, a sudden flash of clarity, recognition, or aha experience, as well as a strong gut-level sense or intuition about something important. Each of these are temporary and fleeting state experiences available regardless of your development. A final example serves to show the correlation between states in the upper left and upper right. However, bear in mind that states, just like all phenomena, have correlates across all quadrants. For now, we're just focusing on the upper quadrants. Let's say you were on a late summer hike, high in the Rocky Mountains, and an afternoon thunderstorm blew in, drenching you, and dropping the temperature by 20 or more degrees. If you couldn't evacuate quickly, you'd be at risk of hypothermia. Simultaneously, you would experience an onset of physiological symptoms, decrease in pulse rate, violent shivering, decreased rate of breathing, as well as subjective state experiences including muddled thinking, a sense of extreme felt coldness, and anxiety. Even in less intense situations than this, upper left states co-arise with upper right physiological states, even if you don't experience the upper right elements directly or in the same manner. Next, we have the category of states called non-ordinary or altered states of consciousness. This, too, is a broad category that contains a vast range of potential individual state experiences. Have you ever taken illicit drugs? If not, maybe a powerful prescription medication that changed the way you felt. Have you ever had a profound experience while making love, or listening to music, or perhaps while meditating or praying? If so, these experiences are types of non-ordinary or altered states, meaning they are not typical, not as common as emotions, for example. Altered refers to the degree that these state experiences are different from your typical everyday states. Non-ordinary or altered states are quite popular, in the sense that people, sometimes called state chasers, seek them out for their pleasurable and exotic effects. Everyone from drug addicts seeking to subconsciously avoid pain to practitioners seeking to cultivate profound spiritual experiences are playing in the realm of non-ordinary states. But just to be clear, non-ordinary states don't have to be as exotic as an all-night acid trip. Rather, a large number of non-ordinary state experiences are not too far removed from what you experience quite often. Let's take a look at two ways to cultivate this category of states. Non-ordinary or altered states can be induced in one of two primary fashions, called endogenous and exogenous. Exogenously induced altered states require some type of external stimulus to be brought in from outside your body. This includes drug-induced states of either the illicit, prescription, or over-the-counter variety. Such drugs are brought into the body where they typically trigger an upper left and upper right altered state change. Also included are trauma-induced states, where any degree of externally situated mental, emotional, or physical trauma can bring about an altered state. Next are near-death experiences, which are known to bring about intense upper left altered states. Finally, we have brainwave entrainment technologies, an interesting set of exogenous state inducers, which include any number of sound or light technologies that bring about different brainwave patterns, and therefore different upper left state experiences. As compared to the exogenous type, endogenously induced altered states don't require external stimulus. Rather, they are brought about internally or could be considered self-created or cultivated. Our first example is meditative states, a wide range of which are brought about by engaging in various practices that have you concentrate your attention on your breath, a mantra, or an external object. Next are holotropic states, which are an interesting type of altered state brought about by engaging in a particular type of breathing practice. Google holotropic breathwork for more information. Then we have flow states, which were best described by psychologist Dr. Csikszentmihalyi, who said they occur when a person's degree of skill and an activity's challenge meet at an optimal level, inducing a flow experience, which yields a distorted sense of time, increased focus, and a strong sense of intrinsic reward. Lucid dreaming is another endogenously induced altered state that happens when you penetrate the dream state with waking-like awareness. In a lucid dream, you are aware that you're dreaming, and you can actively participate in and often manipulate your experiences in the dream realm. So there we have it, exogenous and endogenous techniques for inducing non-ordinary or altered states. These are not categories themselves, but rather manners for inducing states in our second category. In fact, many of the altered states mentioned here can be induced through either technique. For example, did you know that there are devices you can wear during sleep to help induce lucid dreams? This would be an example of an exogenously induced lucid dream state. While we're on the topic of dreams, let's switch gears and look at our final category of states called natural states of consciousness. Natural states of consciousness, also sometimes called broad or ordinary states, are truly the most fundamental and easy to recognize. In fact, you've experienced each of them in the last 24 hours, assuming that is, that you have gone to sleep. Right now, as you are taking this course, you are most likely in the waking state of consciousness. Later today, at some point, you'll fall asleep and eventually enter the dream state. Then, at several instances throughout your time sleeping, you'll slip unknowingly into the dreamless sleep state. So there you have it, our final category of upper left states: waking, dreaming, and deep dreamless sleep. Don't be fooled by your ego into thinking that these states aren't as real as the waking state. All three equally real as they're arising. It so happens that they disclose different types of phenomena. The waking state is defined by the presence of your ego in what is called gross reality. It is arguably the state you're most familiar with, and the one that seems most real to you. You are in the waking state when you experience objects in the gross realm such as trees, rocks, and other people, or when you're riding a bike, viewing this course, or getting on a bus. The dream state, however, is defined by the presence of a subtle and luminous version of your ego, where emotions and thoughts become vivid images, and your body and self are no longer necessarily bound by the laws of the waking realm. You are in the dream state when you experience a wide range of what are called subtle phenomena. These include images, some emotions, visions, luminosities, or experiences in certain visualization exercises and meditations with form. As for the deep dreamless sleep state, well, you tell me. What do you experience after passing from dreaming to dreamless sleep? Tricky question, huh? Most people don't have a clear answer to questions like this, because most don't yet have the ability to enter this state with what is called waking-like awareness or wakefulness. We'll look into this more in a moment. For now, the dreamless sleep state is a formless realm where thoughts and images have dropped away. There exists only a vast, empty, infinite expanse that is beyond an individual I, ego, or small self. So, waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep are the natural states of consciousness arising in your upper left quadrant. If these arise in the upper left, then you must be wondering, what are their upper right correlates? Well, in the upper right, instead of finding states of mind, we have energetic bodies. Taken together, we get the phrase, every mind has a body. Every mind has a body means that every upper left state of mind or consciousness, natural or not, including what we just looked at, waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep that is, has a correlative body of energetic support in the upper right. So, every mind has a body, or every state has an energetic support. These are called the gross, subtle, and causal bodies and correspond to the waking, dreaming, and deep sleep states, respectively. In the waking state, you have a gross physical body, which you are quite familiar with. If not, take a look in the mirror or give yourself a pinch. Yep, that's it, your gross body. And it literally supports you and your waking awareness in the gross realm. What kind of body do you have in the dream realm? Well, a dream body, of course. Or what is called a subtle body. True that sometimes it looks a lot like your gross body, but it doesn't have to, right? This is because your subtle body, serving as the energetic support for you in the dream state, can take on properties and characteristics not available to your gross body. Sometimes it can fly, and sometimes it's made of light. Finally, in the dreamless sleep state, you have what is called a causal body. What does this body look like? Again, this is a tricky question. The causal body is not a body in the physical sense. It is, as we described earlier, an energetic upper right structure that supports your infinite and utterly still causal awareness. Because every mind has a body, we will typically refer to the upper left states as gross, subtle, and causal states, even though these terms technically refer to your three bodies. Gross, subtle, and causal states are three natural states of consciousness, which are always available realities that you can get in touch with at any time. And this includes even times when you're not sleeping. Remember, everyone from babies to Buddhas wakes, dreams, and dreamless sleeps. So the next natural question to arise is, if natural states are so exalted, and yet babies and Buddhas both have access to them also, what's the difference? The difference is called wakefulness with a capital W, and it's the way to experience natural states with full awareness. That is to say, that wakefulness is an earned capacity to enter the natural states with full waking-like awareness. This shows up in two forms. To start, wakefulness is confined to the gross waking realm. This is why it was difficult to answer the question about what the causal or dreamless sleep state was like. But, through various types of practices, you can train yourself to allow wakefulness to penetrate into dream and deep dreamless sleep states. The ability to lucid dream is an early example of this shift in wakefulness. In the first form, wakefulness penetrates these states while you sleep. But in the second form, which is again cultivated through mostly spiritual training, you develop the ability to access states beyond gross, with full wakefulness while you're awake. Come again? Through practices such as meditation taken up over time, while in the waking state, you can gain full awareness of phenomena disclosed by both the subtle and causal states. Now, you might be wondering what the difference is between these two forms. Again, good question. To dig deeper, we need to include a few more important distinctions. Next, we'll look into the way natural states show up in our lives and practice. First, for those of you who are familiar with the integral approach, you know we need to clear up this business with the actual number of natural states. This may seem like unneeded complexity, but depending on what we're using states for, The integral approach will refer to a state progression with either 3, 4, or 5 natural states. Because this is often a point of confusion, and because it is important to see how the different versions relate, let's look at each. First, we have the 3 states we've already discussed: gross to subtle to causal. 3 states are used in learning sequences similar to the one we just experienced. Or, when states and bodies are being discussed without the need to investigate higher spiritual concerns. Next, we have the most complete version that includes 5 states: gross to subtle to causal to witnessing to non-dual. This is the fullest account of natural states and is in line with the great contemplative traditions. Witnessing and non-dual states aren't states in exactly the same sense as gross, subtle, and causal, meaning they aren't realms of the sleep experience and they don't have boundaries, as it were. Rather, they are ever-present conditions or always already realities. Finally, we have the 4-state version, which moves from gross to subtle to causal to non-dual. When we don't need the granularity of 5, but still want to cover the full natural state spectrum, the integral approach will use a 4-state configuration which includes non-dual after causal. When used like this, the witness is folded in as an advanced capacity of the causal state. So we've already looked at gross, subtle, and causal. But what about witness and non-dual? As stated earlier, the witness and non-dual states are ever-present capacities, which hold a special relationship to the other states. The witness state, or just witnessing, is the capacity to observe, see, or witness phenomena arising in the other states. Meaning, for example, it's the capacity to hold unbroken attention in the gross state, and the capacity to witness the entire relative world of form arise as object viewed by the pure witness, the pure subject that is never itself a seen object, but always the pure seer or the pure self that is actually no self. Next, we have non-dual, which refers to both the suchness and isness of reality, right now. Literally, it's the not-to-ness, or ever-present unity of subject and object, form and emptiness, heaven and earth, relative and absolute. When the witness dissolves, and the pure seer in all that is seen become not separate or not two, the non-duality of absolute emptiness and relative form, or the luminous identity of unqualifiable spirit, and all of its manifestations appear as a play of radiant, natural, and spontaneously present love. The funny thing is, absolute and relative are always already not two. But nor are they one, nor both, nor neither. In fact, to even speak about an unqualifiable non-dual spirit is not spirit itself. The non-dual state is an experience of the ever-present, always already suchness of reality present right now. The witnessing and non-dual states are the only exception to the rule of states being exclusive. This is because, in some sense, they are both states and not states. When we first begin to awaken to them as realities, they look a lot like the other states, temporary and fleeting. But as your experience continues to deepen, witnessing and non-dual appear as the ever-present realities that they truly are. Not fleeting, always already in existence, and therefore not like other states and not exclusionary. Another way to understand the difference between these two states is the idea of being aware of everything arising through the eyes of the witness, or to be just aware, which is non-dual. Again, no amount of description will suffice. These states must be experienced to be truly known. Finally, when using the 4 states mentioned earlier, sometimes you'll see references to the causal witness or to causal witnessing awareness, which, again, is the capacity to witness all gross sounds, sights, and sensations, along with subtle emotions, thoughts, energies, and intuitions, while recognizing that you are not identical to any of them. You watch them closely and recognize that they're all impermanent, fleeting objects arising in the ever-present awareness that you truly are. So, in the four states version, witness is part of causal. Does any of this sound familiar? You've most likely had an experience of the witness or non-dual states. They are not just the purview of spiritual masters. Every one of us can have a peak experience of any of the states within or beyond the gross realm. How that works and what the implications are is the topic we will turn to next. Then, as if this weren't enough, the integral approach works with natural states, of whatever number, in two general manners. First, it understands and works with states as we have seen up until this point, as realities available to anyone regardless of their development. And, as we will see next, as possible peak experiences that anyone can have at virtually any point in time. But there is another way that natural states are understood and used by the integral approach, as state stages, which refers to our ability to permanently stabilize our awareness, or wakefulness, at states beyond gross. This movement through states is a product of some type of long-term, typically contemplative practice, and has been described in great detail by spiritual traditions the world over. The emphasis here is on permanently. State stage movement is not the same as temporary peak experiences. Rather, it's the product of actual state stage development. Let's look at peak experiences first, before moving on to what could be called the plateau or permanent experiences of state stage movement. Profound spiritual states are readily available in your experience through what are called peak experiences, triggered by any number of stimuli, from being in nature to meditation to beautiful music or through making love. Peak experiences are spontaneous, temporary glimpses into heightened states of consciousness. There are many types of peak experiences, but four general groupings cover the range quite well. First, you can have a peak experience in the gross waking state. Let's say that you're walking in nature and you have a peak experience of being one with all of the natural world. This is called nature mysticism. Second, you can have a peak experience of the subtle state. You might be dreaming of a great cloud of luminous, radiant love, and you might even feel that you're becoming one with that infinite love. This is called deity mysticism. Third, in reference to the dreamless sleep or causal state, it is also possible to have a peak experience of formless emptiness. Many spiritual or religious experiences are described as empty, formless, or unmanifest, the void, abyss, the ground of being, and so on. Experiences like this are called formless mysticism. It is also called causal mysticism, after the causal state itself. Finally, peak experiences of the non-dual state are also quite common, showing up as radically ordinary, flow-like experiences, where you feel not separate from or united with everything arising in all the other states. This is called non-dual mysticism. Again, the point is that you can have any of these peak experiences at virtually any stage of development, simply because at every stage you happen to wake, dream, and sleep, and therefore these states are available to you. You can be at, say, the orange altitude in any of the developmental lines, and have a gross, subtle, causal, or non-dual peak experience. But as you will see in a moment, your orange altitude structure isn't something to ignore. While it doesn't prevent you from having peak experiences, it is the structure from which you will come to understand and interpret whatever peak experience you have. The concept of peak experiences becomes an even more powerful tool for understanding the vast range of human experience when we extrapolate on the last idea presented. Your vertical or structural center of gravity determines your interpretation of every peak experience. This interplay of states and stages is best encapsulated in a diagram such as this, called the Wilber-Combs lattice, named after Akalin Combs and Ken Wilber, who first spotted these important distinctions. As you can see, on the vertical axis, we have the altitude spectrum, and across the top, we have 4 states: gross, subtle, causal, and non-dual. Then, in the center, each sphere represents a substantively different peak experience. Yes, you're onto the wild implications here. When we take the structural interpretations into consideration, the 4 peak experiences we just spoke about transform into a vast territory of 48 distinctly interpreted peak experiences. Just to be clear, this is one of several possible variations. You can construct a Wilber-Combs lattice using any configuration of levels. Sometimes it works best with egocentric, ethnocentric, world-centric, cosmocentric, or any of the versions of the state spectrum, 3, 4, or 5. The only difference is the amount of detail that's required. Do you need more or less experiences represented? Functionally, any version of the Wilber-Combs lattice is the same. Peak experiences of states are interpreted through structures or levels. We'll come back to the Wilber-Combs lattice in the applications path. For now, we'll look at one classic example which beautifully demonstrates the lattice's true explanatory power. Before we move on, keep in mind that structures are not just responsible for the interpretation of peak experiences. As a matter of fact, they interpret all state experiences from the mundane to the sacred. This is simply because the level of complexity that an individual has developed to determines their depth of understanding of whatever it is that they encounter. Additionally, just as infants do not have access to abstract concepts, structures also determine the depth and type of content available to an individual, whereas states are the space that determine what realm of experience is being revealed. You were fairly developed when it comes to vertical development, right? Your center of gravity is most likely approaching or has already entered integral or second-tier levels of development, right? And you probably had your fair share of peak experiences, probably even non-dual experiences. Have you ever thought that your development influenced the way you made sense of those peak experiences? Consider someone with a much lower center of gravity, say at red. Do you think that they too could have a non-dual peak experience? The answer is a resounding yes. And here's the now classic example. Consider a religious fundamentalist. Doesn't matter which religion. Go ahead and pick your favorite flavor of extreme ideology. After detonating a suicide bomb in a public market, a video surfaces in which they say something like, "Through my act of great service, I now become one with God. May I live in peace eternally." What in the world can make them believe something like that? How could they feel it so deeply and passionately as to justify such extreme actions? They've got to be crazy, right? Well, maybe, but consider this. What if a truly authentic peak experience led them to deeply believe a statement like this? So much so that their actions were not only justified, but were indeed the most appropriate expression. This is where it gets interesting. Their very real peak experience was filtered through an interpretive self-sense that had developed to red. This interpretation then led to the behavioral expression. The peak experience merely provided the deep motivation or ultimate justification, if you will. Even though we can't fully separate these two elements, the state experience and the structural interpretation, we can relate to or work with them differently. First, we must admit that their peak experience was authentic, real, and valid, or at least that this is possible for many fundamentalists, because peak experiences are possible regardless of developmental level. Second, and independently, we can value or rank the action based on this individual's specific interpretation as immoral, egocentric, not compassionate, and ultimately less developmentally complex. Also, it's worth noting that a red center of gravity does not alone lead to suicide bombings. What we actually have is a full psychograph of lines factoring into the interpretation. In a similar sense, nor do non-dual peak experiences necessarily result in violence. In fact, many suicide bombers may just be following orders, not influenced by profound state experience at all. In the end, let your takeaway be the need, or possibly even the requirement, to up-level the complexity with which you come to understand or make sense of other people's actions, motivations, and experiences. And of course, extend the same consideration to your own actions and experiences. This, almost singularly, is the power and promise of the integral approach in action. In summary, here's the most important point. Structures determine the content of all state experiences, and states determine what realms of experience are available. Another way to put this is, states are the containers, and structures determine content and interpretation. Earlier, we said the integral approach worked with natural states in two manners. First was as realms of experience available to each of us. The second way it works with natural states is as state stages, which are the only way in which stages of any category seem to show development. Emotional states and altered states, and states in other quadrants come and go. The natural states of waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep occur, but they don't progress anywhere. They don't develop into new forms with more complex emergence. This is to say that natural states, along with the other categories, do not unfold in stages. But natural states can be trained, and when this involves attention deployment, as with many forms of meditation and contemplation, then these trained states tend to unfold in a sequential fashion from gross to subtle to causal to non-dual. Just to be clear, this isn't the same as vertical development. The states don't develop per se. They are the same as they have always been and always will be. What develops is you. In particular, what develops is your ability to stably access the phenomena disclosed by states beyond gross, with the wakefulness spoken about earlier. When you develop or train your capacity for wakefulness, stabilized access to states typically occurs in a sequential fashion, hence the term, state stages. It is useful before continuing to refine the terms we're using. Up until this point, we have referred to vertical levels of development as stages, levels, structures, and waves. From this point on, we will call vertical levels structure stages. And when states unfold in a sequence, we will refer to the self's progression as going through state stages. So, structure stages, which constitute altitude, progress from infrared on up, and state stages from gross through non-dual stabilization. The great spiritual traditions from east to west have been facilitating this state stage training through meditative and contemplative practices for thousands of years. Let's take a brief look at what they've uncovered. Interestingly, cross-tradition research, which included Buddhist, Hindu, and Christian paths, has shown that the popular romantic notion that each tradition ends at the same place, the same enlightenment experience, is actually false. Rather, it's been shown that in fact what is similar amongst each tradition is the path, from gross to subtle to causal to non-dual stabilization, and that each path actually ends in a different enlightenment experience, one that depends primarily on the aqual matrix configuration of the practitioner and the tradition within which they are practicing. Check it out for yourself. Open virtually any manual of meditation or contemplation, east or west, and you will find a description of meditative or spiritual experiences unfolding in essentially the same order, with very similar general characteristics. St. Teresa of Avila's interior castles, the extraordinary cartographies of St. John of the Cross, the meditative cartography of Buddhaghosa's Visuddhimagga, and the cartographies of St. Dionysius. Evelyn Underhill summarized the theistic traditions as progressing through purification, or gross, illumination, or subtle, dark night, or causal, and unification, or non-dual. Daniel P. Brown, comparing mostly Eastern traditions, found a set of practices for each state: concentration, or gross, insight or subtle, extraordinary or causal, and non-meditation or one taste or non-dual. So, in the end, it seems that the progression from gross to subtle to causal to non-dual, mirroring the same unfolding in our sleep cycle, is a deep or universal feature of contemplative traditions, while the specific mythologies, deities, and narrative explanations are surface features that change from culture to culture. On the one hand, the self's development through state stages follows the same essential path across traditions. And on the other, the self's development through structure stages follows the universal path marked by altitudes. Not surprisingly, we're also left with a few additional questions. How are these two movements similar? And how are they different? How do they relate? How do they interact? How does the self navigate these two spectrums? In the next several slides, we'll explore these questions. But to start, a few general principles. State stages are more fluid, flowing, and amorphous than structure stages. The exact ordering and emphasis on state stages depends on the practice or tradition being followed. There can also be what seems like a temporary skipping around of state stages, but the central flow from gross to non-dual remains intact, as wakefulness starts out identified with the gross state, and there is only one direction to head from there, into subtle, causal, and then non-dual. Therefore, this is the directionality we find in contemplative practices, suggesting that the movement of wakefulness is some type of primordial feature. Technically speaking, what might appear like a skipping of state stages is actually an accelerated movement through states. One always has to come back and stabilize lower states in order to stabilize higher states permanently. This appears like skipping because, unlike structure stages, one does not need proficiency in one state to experience another. Next, there are no peak experiences of higher structures. But, as mentioned previously, when developing through state stages, peak experiences of higher states are possible. In fact, one way of viewing state stage development is that it turns short peak experiences into longer-term plateau experiences, as the self gains more stable and permanent access to higher states. Structures have distinct patterns, like rungs of the ladder. State stages do not show the same characteristics. Barring any state stage pathologies, more on those in a moment, once you are stabilized at states beyond gross, say subtle, you still have access to gross phenomena, which will just arise along with the previously elusive subtle phenomena. This is possible not because the states themselves are inclusive. In fact, they are not. Instead, wakefulness is inclusive in the sense that as it penetrates deeper states, it allows you to witness phenomena disclosed by them. As for the other questions, we will need a diagram to help us out. Here you see structure stages or altitude running vertically, and state stages running horizontally across the top. In some sense, this is very similar to the Wilber-Combs lattice, but it's not serving the same purpose. This diagram helps us to conceptualize the dual movements of individual development. The first is a movement vertically, through structure stages, which we saw in the previous lesson, and the second is a movement horizontally through state stages. If we hold this diagram as an open schematic of your personal development, the space between the two axes can serve as a place to pencil in a map, reflecting the territory of your own developmental life. If age was tracked at the bottom, this map could serve as an integral analog of how parents track a child's height on the wall. You've seen that before, right? Parents mark height at various ages to get a nice map of a child's physical growth. Instead of tracking physical height, this diagram tracks two versions of developmental height, or growth, or embrace, or complexity, whichever word you like, through both spectrums as you age. And at basically any point in your life, this diagram can be used to map your dual self-sense or dual center of gravity, which includes two components, your state self and your structure self. Your state center of gravity, or state self, is defined by whatever state you are stabilized at, gross, subtle, causal, or non-dual. This determines what phenomena you are able to see or have access to. And by stable, we mean relatively continuous access, not temporary access, as with peak experiences. When starting out, your state center of gravity is stationed at gross. Then, at nearly any point, you can take up a contemplative practice, initiate a right turn, and begin shifting your state center of gravity beyond gross. When starting out at gross, your state self is called the ego, and you have access to gross phenomena, like the computer you are viewing this presentation on, the sound of my voice, or any other gross phenomena like trees, rocks, chairs, concepts, physical sensations, and so on. But you do not have regular access to subtle or causal phenomena, unless, of course, you access them through somewhat less regular peak experiences. When your state center of gravity reaches subtle, your state self is called the soul, and you have regular and continual access to the wide range of subtle phenomena, everything from the emotional and energetic undercurrents of typical conversations to, at the most subtle end of the spectrum, the nature of all sensed phenomena just prior to them arising as colors, sounds, or tastes. At the causal state center of gravity, your state self is called the self with a capital S, and you have access to causal phenomena, meaning you have regular and continual access to the inherently empty nature of all form, all of which arises as an object witnessed by your one true self. Finally, when your state center of gravity reaches non-dual, your state self is called suchness, and you have a regular and continual recognition of all phenomena, all form, from every state, as non-dual or not separate from emptiness. Ego, soul, self, and suchness. These are the names of your state self as it journeys through state stages. And this amounts to only half of your dual self-sense. Your structure center of gravity or structure self is the other half, and it determines what sense you make of the phenomena your state self is able to see. Your structure self, determined by your structural center of gravity, is what we spoke about in the lesson on levels. If your state center of gravity determines the realm of experience that you have access to, it's your structure center of gravity that determines how you come to understand and interpret the phenomena that you encounter. This is similar to the dynamic in the Wilber-Combs lattice, but now it isn't just referring to peak experiences, but rather to all phenomena that you have regular and continual access to. Back to the diagram. So, as you age, you have the potential, note, potential, this is not a given, to develop along both of these spectrums. Noting, for example, as you do, that both centers of gravity, that is, both components of your self-sense, shift along with you. The developmental path shown here is arbitrary. Basically, it's just made up to show how a fictional developmental trajectory over someone's life might look. In the awareness path, we will attempt to construct your own unique developmental map. The developmental transitions between structure stages and state stages follow a similar pattern, even though they are referred to by different names. Structural transitions, called fulcrums, are navigated by the self as it moves through structures of consciousness. State transitions, called switch points, are what the self goes through as it moves stabilized awareness from gross to subtle, subtle to causal, and causal to non-dual. Fulcrums are shown in black circles and switch points in white. Both fulcrums and switch points, while different in content, are similar in structure. Each have 3 phases. As you'll remember, fulcrums move from fusion or identification with one's current level to differentiation or disidentification from that level, to integration of the previous level's capacities from the new next higher level. Switch points have 3 phases as well: identification or stabilization at the current state stage, differentiation or transcendence into increasingly stabilized awareness at the next higher state stage, and integration of awareness of new phenomena with awareness of phenomena from the previous state. Another aspect that fulcrums and switch points have in common are the mistakes the self can make when navigating these precarious developmental transitions. As we've said, development is a complex and messy affair. With 2 spectrums and 15 total fulcrums and switch points to navigate, there's a lot of room to make mistakes. In particular, something can go wrong at any of the 3 phases in each transition. First, let's quickly review what we learned earlier about fulcrum pathologies. If the identification phase is not successfully navigated, developmental arrest can set in at one's current level. During the differentiation phase, parts of the self can become stuck to or fixated on elements of the previous level. Finally, during the integration phase, the self may refuse to include aspects of a previous level, paving the way for repression. Repressions and fixations, or allergies and addictions, are also applicable to switch points. A final note: our treatment will focus mainly on the differentiation and integration phases. In this course, we are assuming the position that, as demonstrated in the section on levels, the primary pathology to occur in the identification phase can be viewed as a form of stuckness, addiction, or fixation. As if fulcrum mishaps weren't enough to contend with, you also need to account for switch point pathologies. Each of the 3 switch point phases have their own dysfunctions. Switch point pathologies are similar to fulcrum phase pathologies. In the identification phase, the self can become limited, arrested, or fixated at the ability to see the current state's phenomena. During the differentiation phase, parts of the self can become addicted to the previous state. And during the integration phase, the self can develop an allergy to the previous state. As for addictions and allergies, hold these terms lightly. They are not referring to addictions and allergies of the physical variety. They are used to convey the essence of the general pathologies. In the case of states, addictions can happen as you begin to differentiate from your identification with the current state, but retain attachment to a part of this state. For example, someone who has been experiencing fleeting states of ecstasy or bliss in the subtle state could develop an attachment to this aspect of subtle, while moving on to causal experiences of witnessing, which are indifferent to pleasure or pain. Here, the addiction happens not only due to the pleasant nature of the blissful experience, but also because the addiction allows for the perpetuation of an unconscious attachment to the self-sense. Often, this takes the form of a self-contraction, experienced as fear of death or a will to survive. An allergy happens when one is beginning to integrate the experiences of the previous state with those of the new state. In this process, experiences of the previous state can be repressed, rejected, or negated. For example, the needs and impulses of the gross realm may be rejected and denied as one moves into the subtle state stage. Here, the allergy to gross phenomena hides a hidden dissociation. Similar to the section on fulcrum phases, the hidden dissociation is twofold. First, there is a pre-existing dissociation, potentially from earlier switch point phases, which makes certain gross impulses appear alien before the integration phase of subtle even begins. Second, during the integration phase, the subtle self or the soul either builds defenses to keep out these seemingly foreign impulses which appear threatening, or it associates the entire gross realm with these impulses and represses the gross realm altogether. Simply put, the rejection of the flesh on the way to the soul results in the allergic inability of the soul to integrate what had already been pushed outside of the ownership boundary. A classic example here is the denial of flesh by medieval Christianity. Even highly developed Christian mystics maintained a bias towards the ascending aspects of spirituality. This simply means that they were more favorable towards fleeing the material world. Unlike Platonists, most medieval Christian mystics were very apt in traversing subtle and causal realms, where one is progressively disidentified from gross attachments. On the other hand, most remain silent about the post-causal path of return, where the gross realm is embraced. With an understanding of allergies, one can see how the returning or descending path may have been neglected by these medieval mystics, just as it was neglected by Theravadan Buddhists, due to an emphasis both placed on renouncing the gross realm. An emphasis that increases the likelihood of gross dissociation, which inevitably leads to an allergy of the gross realm. Now that we have dampened the atmosphere with another treatment of what can go wrong, let's shift back to the interesting interactions between state and structure stage development. We've seen a high-level glimpse of how these two spectrums of development look, how they function, and even how they can break down into pathology. How, then, do they interact? In the most fundamental sense, states provide the space or container that structures fill with content. This implies that the container supplied by states can result in a different expression of the content offered by a given structure. Consider the green altitude arising in both the gross and subtle realm. At gross, there is only a rudimentary awareness of interiors, but systems interactions are seen far more clearly. In the gross container, green has inclinations toward extreme relativism and deconstruction, which has dominated academia for the last few decades. But if the same green sensibilities, the same green content, fills a subtle container, which provides access to interiors and emotions, the result is the New Age movement, which sees all these wonderful interior realities arising not just for you, but for everyone. In both of these cases, the content was provided by green, but the container, either gross or subtle, created two different cultural movements, New Age and deconstruction, both of which arose in the last few decades. Next, we have the difference between taking a right-hand turn and a right-hand glimpse. A right-hand glimpse is a peak experience of a state, a brief glimpse to the right that can happen at any structure. A right-hand turn, however, would be a developmental move to the right toward stabilizing access beyond gross. This turn is often initiated by engaging some type of contemplative practice. Taking a right turn too early in development, around magenta or red, can inhibit structural growth and could lead to pathologies. Those early altitudes are important structure-building levels, where your ego is differentiating and building the resiliency it needs to process state experiences. It's important to build ego structure before deconstructing ego attachment through spiritual training. This is not to say that an early right turn is necessarily bad or impossible, but rather that it would require strong lower quadrant support for an immature self-sense to be successful in metabolizing the experience of early horizontal movement. On the flip side, taking a right-hand turn later in development, say post the green altitude, may increase the speed of vertical growth by loosening identification with current structures. Peak experiences or right-hand glimpses of higher states can have a micro-transformative effect on your movement through vertical fulcrums, or that they could have a positive or negative effect on your progression through state stages. Positive in that they can help initiate micro-transformations through switch points if they are the result of a sustained practice, and negative in that they can take you too far too quickly, luring you to more advanced practices before you've fully mastered more foundational practices and achieved a healthy stabilization at previous state stages. Another set of interesting interactions or relationships emerge in the connection between third-tier structures and states. Vertical development into third tier seems to coincide with state stabilizations beyond gross. It is not that one causes the other, but that development into these higher realms necessitates state stabilization. At violet, subtle state stabilization takes place if it has not yet happened. At ultraviolet, stabilization at causal occurs, and at clear light, stabilization at non-dual. One way to understand this is by returning to the idea of states as containers for structural content. At post-violet altitudes, the content of these structures is so vast, so transpersonal, that the containers required are larger, more spacious, and beyond gross. This brings up a few questions. If high states and high structures go together, What is the difference between violet and subtle, ultraviolet and causal, and clear light and non-dual? The primary difference has to do with perspectives. The causal state is without any content. It's pure, vast openness, transparent, glimmering awareness. Overmind or ultraviolet, on the other hand, is all of that plus all the structures that have come before it. Overmind can take as object all the aspects of previous structures. This is like omniscience of your own being, whereas causal is just empty. At supermind or clear light, you are one with the whole universe of form, the whole developing world, and all its structures and perspectives. Non-dual, on the other hand, also often called big mind, is just pure perception, no perspectives. Supermind is all perspectives. Big mind is of the unmanifest realm, and is therefore not very inclusive of structures. Supermind is all structures. The last two structures of overmind and supermind are where big mind enters evolution. In the most general sense, the primary thing these high structures and high states have in common is that they are often both referred to as spiritual. But we need to be careful here, because spiritual has no less than 5 distinct meanings, each of which the integral approach carefully tracks. What? Spiritual doesn't just mean, spiritual? Nope, it actually has 5 different meanings. The integral approach, while certainly complex, didn't create these distinctions. Rather, it recognized and grouped the various uses of the word in the culture at large. This includes scholars, practitioners, teachers, and laypeople alike. While most of these folks don't use these terms, you'll most likely recognize the meanings. First, spiritual can mean the highest transrational or transpersonal levels in any line. Next, spiritual can mean a separate line itself, such as James Fowler's line of faith development. Third, spiritual can mean an extraordinary altered state or peak experience. Fourth, spiritual can mean a general attitude of openness and love. And fifth, spiritual can refer to one face of God or one aspect of reality that is taken as most real. What is the first thing you notice here? Yep, these 5 meanings align with the 5 components of Aquil. Believe it or not, when we say that the elements of Aquil can be pointed to in your life experience, here they are again, at the core of how we understand spirituality. Sticking with the 5 meanings of spiritual, let's really ground this by reviewing a few examples. Spirituality as a level concerns the transrational, transpersonal, or third-tier structures in any line. The clearest example of this would be the popularized version of the integral map. Typically, integral practitioners refer to third-tier levels as spiritual, indicating that to be spiritual means high or complex vertical development. Technically, please note that while most people in the integral community typically use this definition, the theory makes room for all of them and strongly suggests tracking of each type of meaning closely. Spirituality as a line bespeaks of something like spiritual intelligence, which is available not only at the highest levels in any of the lines, but is its own developmental line entirely, typically spanning from the least complex to most complex altitudes. James Fowler's research in faith development is one example. With this meaning, spiritual has its own set of first, second, and third-tier levels. As you can see, this is very different than the first meaning. Juxtaposing the two can cause complications. Sometimes, people speak of spirituality in the sense of a religious or spiritual experience. This would be spirituality as high-state experience, typically witness or non-dual. Virtually the entire corpus of the shamanic tradition and Daniel Goleman's work on meditative experience utilize the state-based meaning of spirituality. Sometimes people simply speak of spiritual as involving a special attitude which can be present at any stage or state, perhaps love or compassion or wisdom. In this sense, spiritual is understood as a type of disposition or a type of person. This usage is very popular in almost all forms of New Age spirituality. Spirituality as a quadrant may seem a bit strange at first. Unlike the other meanings, adherents of this brand of spirituality don't typically refer to their beliefs as explicitly spiritual. Rather, it's a type of spiritual agnosticism, if you will. This meaning aligns with one of the four quadrant absolutisms: extreme idealism in the upper left, scientism in the upper right, holism in the lower right, or relativism in the lower left. Adherents to these extreme views posit one quadrant as more real or fundamental than the others. In a way, they spiritually idolize one portion of reality. Also, spirituality as a quadrant comes in when speaking of the three faces of God. God in the first person, or God as your ultimate identity, is popular in the Buddhist traditions. God in the second person, or God as a great other who you can enter into intimate communion with, is popular in the theistic traditions. And God in the third person, or God as all of manifestation or the great web of life, is prevalent in most forms of nature mysticism. Only embracing one of the three equiprimordial perspectives on spirit leads to a defacing or dishonoring of spirit's true nature, and another type of quadrant perspective absolutism. If these are the five meanings of spiritual, what about enlightenment? No one is worth their spiritual salt unless they are enlightened, right? If you've ever pondered these questions, you'll be excited to discover that the integral map offers a unique and, dare we say, totally revolutionary view of enlightenment as well. And it just so happens to work with a diagram and concepts we've been exploring for the last several slides. To understand enlightenment from an integral perspective, we first need to frame the issue in a historical context. We'll try to keep this brief, by offering two parts of the problem and then the solution. Enlightenment problem, Part A. If enlightenment means being one with everything, that is, being one with both the relative realm, or structures, and absolute realm, or states, and the world of form is evolving, then if you are enlightened today, do you lose your enlightenment tomorrow? Because of this, enlightenment is typically construed only as having a states component. In other words, a non-dual mysticism or union with gross, subtle, and causal. You learned earlier that this can occur at any structure, so a non-dual union at ethnocentric structures leaves out a bunch of higher altitudes, and ultimately is a partial and fragmented enlightenment that only includes one half of spirit. And as if that weren't problematic enough, there's another part. Enlightenment problem, Part B. The wisdom traditions believed that the great chain of being, or the general spiral of vertical development, existed in its entirety in a timeless and eternal manner. Meaning, they believed it was and always had been pre-given. But developmental research shows that the spiral has actually unfolded over time because the world of form evolved. If structures aren't pre-given, then you would have to wait until all of time has unfolded to be one with the entire world of form. And that's quite a long time. The solution to this two-part conundrum brings us back to our diagram. Structure stages from birth to the highest levels which have emerged are the path toward ultimate fullness. Fullness in complexity, fullness in perspective, and in the ability to take all the world of form as object. These structures are not pre-given. Instead, as we learned in the lesson on levels, they are cosmic habits or grooves, potentials laid down by earlier generations' developmental pioneers. Then we have state stages, from gross stabilization to non-dual, which are the path to ultimate freedom, freedom from false self, freedom from suffering, and freedom from an exclusive identification with your ego. Simply put, then, integral enlightenment is a genuine non-dual union of emptiness and form. Emptiness is always timeless and equally free, and form is always evolving and fuller with the passage of time. To be integrally enlightened, you need to be one with both emptiness and the evolving world of form in its entirety as available in a given time. And enlightenment evolves. Full integral enlightenment is shifting with the tides of evolution. As higher structures emerge, enlightenment needs to include them. To be enlightened now is fuller than being enlightened 1,500 years ago, when there were fewer structures laid down as cosmic habits. Same timeless emptiness, but different evolving form. Buddha gets just as much freedom, but not as much fullness, because there is more manifest reality to be one with today than there was 2,000 years ago. So, integral enlightenment or full enlightenment is to be one with all states and all structures that have emerged at a given time in history. And evolution isn't going to really stop, so the highest structure of today will be commonplace in the future. And that puts quite a different spin on our diagram, huh? It's now the map of the territory of your own personal quest for a fully integral enlightenment. When the two great developmental spectrums, one vertical and the other horizontal, are brought together, not only do we see the path towards integral enlightenment, but we also encounter the two movements or two breaths of your very own developmental territory. The path to greater freedom through stage development and the path to ultimate fullness through structure stage development. These two breaths are fundamental, even archetypal perhaps. They are the movement of being and becoming, being free from all that is and becoming one with all that can be at this point in history. Also, these two paths can simply be called the path of waking up and the path of growing up. The former is through states and the latter through structures. And as individuals embracing the integral path, cultivating only one of these movements is not enough. It would be partial, like breathing in and not breathing out. Also, one path without the other would be far less exciting. Without a path for waking up to a transcended or transmuted ego, the path of growing up would be an incomplete expression of cosmic development. And without the path of growing up, there would be no ego to transcend. Finally, once again, we reach the conclusion of the theory branch only to be reminded that theory alone is not enough. States of consciousness are constantly arising in your experience. Regardless of whether they are temporary phenomenal states of mind, peak experiences, altered states, or ever-present witnessing and non-dual experiences, if recognized, realized, or awakened to, they have a tremendous amount to offer our lives. Now that you understand what states are, how do you recognize them? How do you use them to more fully experience your life and your world? Continue on to the next two learning paths and find out. What you'll experience firsthand is the amazing power of states for realizing your latent potential and for cultivating a life of radical freedom and radical fullness.
Take the 5 meanings of the word spiritual, 5 natural states, 12 structures of development, 4 dimensions of reality, 6 major religious traditions which are spread around the globe in 7 or 8 major geographic areas, and throw it in a blender. Turn it on, and you will get a mind-boggling number of permutations of actual human religious experience. If that's not a recipe for massive confusion about the nature of spirituality, then we don't know what is. Fortunately, the theory pertaining to states offers us incredible tools for making sense of this substantial and important consideration, one which, remember, wars are fought over. In particular, the Wilber-Combs lattice serves as a roadmap to the very tricky territory of how humans make sense of spirituality. There's a lot to tackle in the arena of applying states as a tool. There's also a lot at stake. In this learning path, we'll focus specifically on using the Wilber-Combs lattice to make sense of different spiritual experiences. To start, we'll do an interactive review of the Wilber-Combs lattice. On the next slide, you'll see the lattice diagram, similar to what we saw earlier, each altitude up to clear light running vertically and 4 states arranged across the top. In the middle, you'll find sample experiences. Each column concerns a similar experience and how it's understood differently through the lens of each level. Gross concerns a nature mysticism experience. Subtle, an encounter with Jesus Christ. Causal, a classic Buddhist experience of emptiness. And non-dual, an ordinary experience with a slightly Eastern spiritual flavor. Click through each sphere to directly experience the sheer magnitude of experiences this seemingly simple map encapsulates. As you do, remember the important lesson about states. Anyone can have a peak experience of any state of consciousness. When they do, the state determines the realm or container of the experience, whether gross, subtle, causal, or non-dual, and the structure determines the content and interpretation. First spotted by Ken Wilber and Wilber-Combs, the Wilber-Combs lattice is a matrix of different state experiences interpreted through structures. The states are aligned across the top, and some version of the vertical spiral of development along the left, and each intersection represents a distinct type of interpreted state experience. Through the radical union of form and emptiness, my heart opens in glorious compassion, bursting forth with love for all of us, just as we are, equal manifestations of the non-dual unity, the ultimate truth known through many expressions of the One. All individuals are perfectly equal manifestations of the divine. Oneness with the world of my tribe and our magical association with our land. Unity with the 5 elements of wind, fire, water, earth, and metal. A union with the spirits that govern nature. A oneness with immediate surroundings. Oneness with a world that responds to my wishes and desires. Jesus is my personal protector. He looks after my desires, my wishes, and my tribe. Everyone in my tribe shares a magical kinship and common magical ancestry with Jesus as a divine being. There are other gods for other people, but my Jesus is my one and only Savior. He performs miracles that protect me, get me what I want, and He takes care of my health. This realization is a personal realm of peace, free from suffering. The cessation of my desire, my needs, my fear has left me recognizing that everything about me is empty, open, and still. Through you, my group, I become one with all things. This is impersonal. You are my consort, my vehicle for self-transcendence and self-dissolution. From there, my self resurrects as not separate from everything else it is aware of. Oneness with multiple and complex ecosystems and a world where every species is equal in significance. Oneness with a colorful and diverse society which possesses numerous values, beliefs, and views. A sense of unity with deep ecology. A union with nature that is primarily feminine in its attributes. Jesus is an egalitarian, a defender of marginalized souls and someone who stresses humanness over divinity. I encounter Jesus on behalf of all of us, and I bring His message of forgiveness, peace, and desire for us to heal society. He communicates with us about God's message, which is allegorical and open to interpretation by people of other traditions, who shall not be marginalized for adhering to different beliefs. I see Jesus as my ally and my friend. The Buddhist path toward the radical freedom of nirvana is the distillation of all spiritual searchings on all paths. It's the essence of all of our spiritual motivations, realized as being grounded in the same freedom. It just happens to be my choice to pursue this path. Others can find the same peace along their path, because it's a pure, vast, open awareness given equally and freely to all. None better, none worse, all equal. Through the radical union of form and emptiness, my heart opens in glorious compassion, bursting forth with love for all of us, just as we are, equal manifestations of the non-dual unity, the ultimate truth known through many expressions of the One. All individuals are perfectly equal manifestations of the divine. Oneness with a multi-layered global ecosystem. Oneness with interplanetary systems and chaos. Oneness with a nature that's able to house both a perspective of unconditional embrace and a hierarchy of significance. Oneness with eros and agape as perceived in the natural world. Oneness with a world of paradoxes. Jesus is a grand unifier, a great realized being. Through him, I experience God as a divine pull that provides incentives for further growth. I deeply experience God through Jesus as both fully human and fully divine. I experience a God who can recognize truth in all its expressions while unifying them through a deeper and more holistic understanding. I recognize the entire cosmos, all beings, all phenomena, and all elements of the here and now as just this, simple, pure, and empty. In this realm, in this experience, we're all able to experience the connection of the entire world at rest. The deeper and higher my realization, the deeper my peace through endless levels of realization. The twisting and intricate turnings of this radiant cosmos unite in a union of paradox, unfolding as a many-tiered, multifaceted existence where the ascent and descent of spirit meet as the non-dual union of every arising in the cosmos. Oneness with the global holarchical ecosystem. Unity with a multi-layered and connected reality that is simultaneously a cohesive whole. Union with a world of multiple interrelated and coordinated developmental systems. Jesus is the divine face of a cosmic integrative principle or drive. Through him, I encountered the wonder of the Trinity, the notion of cosmic evolution, and the path towards greater freedom. Through him, God is experienced as both compassion and wisdom, the divine descending to penetrate all beings in all levels and domains. My experience of the divine is complex enough to correctly contextualize all previous interpretations of the divine, as well as to deeply understand and have compassion for all other experiences of the divine. The eternal, timeless, and unborn is the true essence of the world of form. Involution and evolution find their source, as do all beings, in this place of radical emptiness, radical peace, pure, unqualifiable awareness. The relative and the absolute are not two, not one, not both, and not neither. Non-duality is the experience of that suchness. It's not anything else. Words cannot describe spirit, because spirit is ineffable. Despite this union, non-dual spirit manifests as unique perspectives in me and you. The radical subjectivity of each eye point is a localization of non-localized spirit. Oneness with complex systems of interacting subtle and physical energy systems of the physiosphere, biosphere, noosphere, and cosmosphere. A union in a world where evolutionary and involutionary forces are further integrated into the simultaneous expression of radical complexity expressed in every moment. In Jesus, I encounter a reflection of myself as a facet of the divine. Christ is truly cosmic, a radically divine and radically human expression of all-pervading spirit, a luminous being of subtle light that is indistinguishable from the light that each of us are. I come to rest as vast, transparent clarity. an undying being who is returned to the source from which I unwaveringly arise in every moment. I've realized the inherent emptiness of all gross things. My intuition, like the wind softly whispering at sunrise, say, go further. Do not stop here. Don't become attached to the stillness. Don't forget your true nature. As a unique expression of the one true spirit, I revel in the many traditions and expression of a single, shining truth. As such, I pull words from their source, from the place of the truest expression in the moment. I am one with the gross earth and all its inhabitants. At the beginning of deity mysticism, I have transcended and included pantheism or earth mysticism. Union with the earth as divine, luminous, deep patterns of interconnection, self-seen and self-realized. Jesus is the core reality of me and all beings, a luminous light of love and bliss that pervades the entire cosmos, delivering me and all souls who accept his divinity. The earth and all beings are transient, insubstantial, and I am one with that. I am one with a pure, luminous, subtle light, present constantly, day and night, as my true nature. I am one with the subtle radiant light and all its manifestations, liberating me from the pain of the gross realm and its suffering. Earth experienced as the outer form of a deep emptiness or pure, unqualifiable awareness. Radiant, transparent truth, immediately initiated and self-known. All previous structures contribute to my self-awareness. Jesus is the pure transparency and openness that cleanses all sin and despair, enveloping me in his halo of light and love. I have only to accept him in my heart for everlasting, timeless, and spaceless salvation. Resting as pure witness, pure awareness, pure openness, the entire world arises in my consciousness, pure and open and free. I am that pure awareness, free of all that arises. I am the vast, pure, open, translucent emptiness, spaceless and infinite, timeless and eternal, the original face I had before my parents were born, endlessly deep and truly liberating. Earth is experienced as a texture of my own suchness, and the same is true for all sentient beings. Timeless, spaceless, pure presence, deep now moment, infinite and eternal flow. Jesus is the all-pervading, all-present ground of all being, present in every single thing, event, and being in the world. Accepting this brings true at-one-ment for me and all souls everywhere. I am not only the witness, but the entire world of form. I feel very close to being one with that entire world. I'm a vast, infinite, open, and spacious infinity, stretching timelessly through the entire cosmos, never born and never dying. Emptiness and form are not two, not one, and I am that. Aware of all previous structures and forms, I transcend them all. All manifestation is simply a texture of suchness. my real self, and I am that eternally. The Wilber-Combs lattice interaction was included here as a reference and teaching tool. Rarely do you get to systematically go through the entire matrix, noting how each intersection changes as you either go up the spiral or across the states. As for an application of states, this activity is going to bring together much of what we've learned thus far: quadrants, levels, and states, using the Wilber-Combs lattice to investigate real-life events, case studies, news stories, and more. Its aim is to see if an integral approach can uncover hidden aqual dynamics in these specific situations. Again, this is training a skill set in analysis, which can then be applied to personal situations, issues, or challenges, anything you encounter in the world that you'd like to make more sense of. Next, you'll be presented with a series of unrelated stories. Read each one carefully before answering the questions which follow. The questions are simple and will be similar each time. They'll walk you through a brief analysis of each case. These stories, anecdotes, and case studies were taken from media outlets over the past few years. They represent, in some sense, the way that spirituality and God show up in our culture. A complete absence of reflection on the meaning of spirituality and a lack of differentiation between states providing experiences and structures providing interpretations render each of these views very susceptible to being wrongfully taken as most true. Through an integral lens, what we find is that each of these cases are true, and each are also partial. Each have a home or place from which they emerge in the aqual matrix. Identifying these locations is an important aspect of integral application and analysis. In general, what was your experience of this exercise? Did you notice the aggregation of your learning throughout this course as providing new and in-depth ways of seeing into the heart of such stories? Did you notice how the explanatory power of Akalin increases when you look through multiple elements at one time? What did you find to be the most difficult to assess, states or structures? Why was this the case? Were you able to locate the meaning of spirituality at play in each? Sometimes several of the 5 definitions are mixed together implicitly and are therefore difficult to reconcile with the descriptions we gave. It takes some time to be able to clearly parse those out, but did you notice that many stories were using spirituality in a different sense, making their conclusions and recommendations difficult to compare with one another? As you've probably noticed by this point, the theoretical distinctions we've made are never quite as clear when we attempt to locate them in analysis. Often, the edges are blurry, and only a partial recognition of what seemed like a clear distinction is possible. When working with Akalin theory, regardless of the element, we're working with a map that distills the actual territory of experience into clear definitions, principles, and examples. From an abstracted perspective, this is not only possible, but ideal for your learning. But when getting to the issues of pragmatic application, you're required to stretch those definitions and principles to mold them into an application to what's actually happening in the real world. This, as you might expect, is a skill that needs to be cultivated over time and with ample practice. This is why we keep returning to these application exercises, and why we've always included awareness components to complement the theory and application. As we move forward, if you've not already done so, please engage in the awareness learning path in states. Again, we'll bring together many elements that we've covered in the last 2 lessons as we attempt to construct a map of your own development.
In previous lessons, we variously referred to the elements of Akalin as arising in your awareness, or available in your awareness, or describing the contours of your consciousness. When it comes to states, we'll nuance this description a bit. Let's make a distinction between available in your awareness and arising in your awareness. Compared to, say, quadrants, which are the 4 fundamental dimensions of your being that we can point to right now, some states, particularly the natural states that we've been spending so much time on, are available as potentials, but aren't as easy to point to. This is, of course, not true for the examples provided at the beginning of this lesson. Phenomenal states are directly and easily available. The natural states, particularly each of them beyond gross, need to be experienced to be fully known. And no amount of pointing or cognitive-oriented instruction will evoke a peak experience of these realms. That is, to be fair, if you don't already have stabilized access to them. Your upper left natural states are, as we've seen, sometimes difficult to locate despite being always available. We can also employ a third-person-oriented approach, a bit of healthy, self-reflective structuralism, if you will, to cultivate a deeper awareness of state and structure stages in our lives. Next, we will go through an activity that will ask you to reflect on your own development, in both structures and states. The purpose is several-fold. First is to exercise a primarily third-person perspective in the investigation of states and structure stages. Second, to reconsider your own development in a real, tangible, intentional, and reflective manner, in service of better understanding our developmental history and better honoring our current developmental configuration. Third, to locate pivotal experiences from our past that you think had impact on your growth. And fourth, to cultivate more compassion from our own past and future trajectories. Through all of this, our hope is that you expand our capacity to honor both different and similar trajectories in others. Remember, this type of self-reflection is unable to clearly reveal that which we're still subject to, or that which we haven't developmentally moved past and rendered an object in awareness. But this need not prevent us from engaging in activity like this. It just serves as a reminder that it won't be 100% accurate, will require a bit of inferential reconstruction on your end, and, in general, shouldn't be held too tightly. Cultivating a third-person view of our own unfolding is a very important capacity of self-reflection and conscious development. This activity will guide you through a series of reflections for building a developmental map reflecting your own unique experiences and unfolding. To start, begin by printing out this diagram. It's a slightly modified version of the one we worked with in the theory path. You can complete this activity in one of two ways. Either you can construct that map as we go along, or you can take notes and construct the map in the final step. Either way will work, but unless you have a fairly decent sense of what your map will look like, or don't mind creating another one during the final step, we recommend taking notes as you go along. There are 8 phases in all. Click around to each step, completing them in any order. We all started at square one, so at least we know where all of our maps are going to begin. From there, it will take a bit of reconstruction. To start, how far back can you remember? Not just your first memory, but at what point in your past do you have a good recollection of how you thought, what you believed, etc.? For most people, it may be as late as orange, and maybe red. This can be challenging, so hold it lightly. The structure of the rational psyche typically rejects that which is pre-rational. This is precisely why we don't remember the incoherent sequences in our dreams. It's also connected to how the view from previous levels is negated. So do your best with this. Think back to the earliest way of being that you remember relatively distinct examples of. From that place, take notes on when and how you made transitions through the higher structures. When, as in what age, and how, as in were there any noticeable events that precipitated the movement? Do you have any distinct memories as to when a particular altitude view stopped working for you? In your journal, note at what age you passed through these fulcrums. Also, this series of steps will lead you to the altitude at which you think you currently reside. If you can, indicate at what phase of this fulcrum you are at. Meaning, if you are teal, are you integrating the past altitude, solidly fused or identified with teal, or differentiating towards turquoise? Then, note why you think this is the case. Consider your past, again, as far back as you can remember, and bring to mind any profound peak experiences you've had. Maybe sometime when you were in nature or your first spiritual experience. For most of us, our first peak experience was quite earlier, before we could identify it as such, or make much sense of it. Try to recall the most prominent of these experiences. Note when they occurred, what state you think it was a peak of, and what circumstances precipitated the event. In your journal, record the major events, the state, and when they roughly took place. Also recall, and note if you'd like, what the results of these peak experiences were. How did they affect you? What sense, or not, did you make of them? This phase is kind of tricky, given that the nature of pathologies is such that they are difficult to locate and to face. But, since you have most likely been on a path of personal growth for some time, what vertical or fulcrum pathologies have you resolved? Consider your past. Did you ever have issues with anger, anxiety, or fear? To the best of your knowledge, what fulcrum do you think these showed up at? Did you ever develop through a stage and then were left with a fixation to some element or feature of that stage? What about any repressions of previous stages? For example, did you repress aspects of amber rules, and boundaries because of the way you were raised or because of negative experience with religion? If so, note in your journal the stages where these took place, when you think you may have resolved them, and what the general effects of the pathologies were. Now, let's look at your state stage development. Again, we all start out at square one, so begin with an identification at gross. Then consider any events that may have initiated a right-hand turn. For many people, it's a profound peak experience that led to some type of contemplative practice. Or it may have been a choice to experiment with drugs or other state inducers, which led to a more concentrated state training practice of some variety. Where do you think your state stabilization is currently located? Have you moved stably beyond gross, suggesting that you have regular access to subtle phenomena? Have you moved beyond subtle? Maybe farther. When you have a sense of your state, consider what switch point phase you are currently navigating: identification, differentiation, or integration. If you don't think you have developed much in the way of the state stage spectrum, or if you're not sure, don't worry, many people haven't. State stage movement is the product of some type of contemplative practice, which you may not yet be involved in or perhaps haven't been involved for long enough to experience a shift. Note in your journal what type of phenomena you have the most stabilized access to. Recall the descriptions we provided earlier and your experience of the pointing out meditation earlier in this path. Also, feel free to go back to the theory path if you need a refresher. Remember, state stabilization is different than peak experiences, which we noted in an earlier phase. While peak experiences may certainly have an effect on your state stage movement, they are not directly indicative of stable access to states beyond gross. All right, now we're getting to the heart of half of your current self-sense. Consider your structural growth once again. What do you think your current structural or vertical center of gravity is? Remember, it is close to your proximate self-development in the self-identity line. Note this in your journal. Then, check in with your other major lines. Do you think your development in those capacities is within a stage or two above or beneath the center of gravity you've assigned? Your cognitive growth will lead your psychograph as necessary, but not sufficient for growth in other lines. So, don't assign your center of gravity to the expected height of your cognitive line. In your journal, record where your vertical center of gravity is, and note why you think that is the case. Again, hold this lightly. There is no way to get this 100% right through methods like this. And besides, that's not the aim of this activity. Rather, we're just guiding you in considering these important aspects of your own growth in emergence. So if you're doing that, you're on the right track. Now for the other half of your self-sense. Consider your state growth once again. Where do you think your state or horizontal center of gravity is? Since we aren't working with multiple lines in state development, this will be similar to your investigation of state stage growth in the earlier phase. Again, don't pass judgment on yourself as to where you think your state center is currently located. Record in your journal your ad hoc assessment of your state center of gravity and why you think that is the case. Our last step is a bit of a paradox, in that current pathologies, as compared to past pathologies, are even more difficult to locate. Because, by definition, you are still subject to them and therefore can't view them as an object. But for what it's worth, give this a shot. Do you sense any current pathologies? Consider any that have just begun to surface, and which you are starting to make sense of or possibly resolve. If you get stuck, go ask someone who is close to you. If you've never done so, you'll be pleasantly surprised at how well other people can locate the shadow qualities in us. Addictions, allergies, fixations, repressions, and projections that are invisible to us oftentimes define a large part of who we are in the eyes of others. As you are considering this, include a general assessment of both your structure and state development. Any allergies or addictions to previous or emerging state or structure stages? If so, note what they are and journal a bit about the nature of them. Also, make sure to hold this lightly. It is more aimed at going through the motions of serious self-inquiry than getting an accurate picture of current pathologies, which again is a bit of a paradox. Now that you've taken notes on the various elements of your past and current development, you can begin to construct a rough estimate of your developmental map, using the diagram that you've already printed. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and do it now. To build this map, start with your early development. Make a circle at each fulcrum, indicating on the horizontal axis the general age around which you navigated it. What you're aiming for should look something like this. Then, indicate any peak experiences you had, in this manner noting both the state and the age. Next, mark down any state stage movement, with a circle marking the navigation of switch points. Again, something like this is the goal. Next, indicate both your current state and structure center of gravity, drawing a circle around the region where your current development is best described. Something like this should do. Then, go back and indicate any past pathologies, like this. Finally, indicate any current pathologies in this manner. In the end, your unique developmental map should, well, look really quite messy. But it's a mess that represents your unique growth and development. Take a global perspective on this map and make any changes or adjustments as needed. If you do, note to yourself, why are you making that change? As the final step, make a digital copy of your map and post it on your blog or Facebook page for all to see. Or feel free to go ahead and burn the evidence, whichever feels most appropriate. All right, just kidding. There's no need to do either of those things. In fact, you don't need to do anything in particular with this map if you don't feel called to. It is a rough estimate, a reflective reconstruction of your current perspective on your development through both the vertical and horizontal spectrums. The point is not the map per se, rather it's the experience of constructing it. The perspectives you have just taken on yourself and your own unfolding are the point. The map is just a representation of those reflections. In general, what part of this map-making process did you find most challenging? Was it the experience of recalling your past growth? Or was it being asked to confront your current development? Alternately, what did you find exciting about this process? What insights emerged? Are the reflective skills we employed familiar to you? Or are they a new set of lenses you are only now starting to look through? Going forward, or in review of any element of this course, you can take similar perspectives on the ways in which Akalin describes your own past or current unfolding. While this is only one version of the type of self-reflection that will deeply serve your integral embodiment, it is nonetheless an important set of considerations, which form a solid foundation of self-inquiry and perspectival engagement with your own growth. We've spent a fairly large portion of our time in the application and awareness learning paths, privileging one category of states over the others. Natural states are indeed exciting. Anything that contains such a treasure trove of spiritual wisdom is quite alluring. But let's not forget that they are only one type in our overall cartography of upper left states. Phenomenal states, particularly emotions, and non-ordinary and altered states also beg for your attention. And more than just your attention, but your diligent dedication to training your ability to recognize them arising in each moment, and to discover ways to work more effectively and compassionately with these states as they show up in both yourself and in others. Because natural states of consciousness, conceived of in a manner like we have presented here, are a new concept for most people, We have intentionally devoted more time to their recognition and applicability. The result, we hope, is one that has expanded your awareness of states without excluding or marginalizing the profound and important aspects of your emotional state experiences.
States are at the heart of your direct, moment-to-moment experience. Through your first-person awareness, they appear as so direct and immediate that they may seem different than other elements of Aquil, perhaps easier to grasp intuitively or just more experiential. States, as the fourth component of our integral map, are equally important and just as primordial as the other, possibly less apparent elements. Through several different categories, states reveal, but are not limited to, phenomena such as what is it that you feel, what your emotions are, how your consciousness gets altered by beautiful music, and the path towards liberation from an exclusive identification with your ego. In addition to this gift of the contemplative paths, as we've seen, states also help you understand the wild diversity in human spiritual experience. The Wilber-Combs lattice guides us through a matrix of different experiences interpreted through different structures. It allows every experience of God or ultimate reality, by whatever name, to have a home, a place to exist in a grand tapestry of human spirituality. And you also discovered two developmental paths, one leading down the path towards ultimate freedom and the other towards ultimate fullness. Finally, you learn that as your state self shifts out of gross and into subtle, and out of subtle into causal, wakefulness penetrates all states, allowing you to witness all phenomena through the eyes of the one true seer. Then, with a final shift, the seer dissolves completely into all that is seen, as the non-dual suchness of this very moment is recognized as always already present. In the words of Zen master Dogen Zenji, the slowly drifting cloud is pitiful. What dream walkers we all are, awakened the one great truth, black rain on a temple roof. Before moving on to the next lesson in this course, let's review the theoretical points we've covered on states. States are defined as temporary or fleeting aspects of each of the four quadrants. States are typically exclusive in that you can't be in different states of the same category at the same time. The only exceptions are witnessing and non-dual in that they are ever present. Generally speaking, states don't show development. Also, they can be equally accessed by individuals at any level of development. When moving through state stages, the self is developing rather than the states, which are already present. States in the upper left fall into three categories: phenomenal states, non-ordinary or altered states, and natural states. The categories of upper left states cover a range of experience and phenomena, from simple emotions to mystical spiritual experiences. Phenomenal states are fleeting experiences of body and mind, emotions of joy, sorrow, and pain, and the felt sense of coldness or anxiety are just a few of many dozen phenomenal states. Altered states include everything from mystical experiences to flow states and near-death experiences to meditative states. They can be induced endogenously or from within your own being, as in meditation or flow, or they can be induced exogenously from outside your being by brainwave-inducing technologies or pharmaceuticals, for example. Natural states are experienced by everyone, from babies to Buddhas, in that everyone has access to the waking, dreaming, and deep dreamless sleep states. Natural states are supported by energetic bodies in the upper right, called gross, subtle, and causal. Often those terms are used to refer to the upper left states. Gross waking state is the manifest world of objects, physical laws, and everything that can be sensed in a concrete manner. It's supported by the gross physical body. The subtle or dream state includes emotions, higher thoughts, visions, luminosity, and a host of transformations of body and mind that do not conform to gross realm laws. It's supported by the subtle luminous or energetic body. The causal or deep sleep state is the formless ground of being. It is vast, still, and transparent awareness of the void or emptiness. It's supported by the utterly still and illimitable causal body. State of witnessing or turiya is ever present. It's the one true seer whose awareness witnesses the arising of everything as an object. The non-dual state, turiyatita, is the union of all other states. It too is ever present and arises when the witness dissolves into all that is witnessed. When subject and object no longer work as distinctions, the world of form is seen as not separate from emptiness. Integral theory uses three versions of this natural state spectrum. First are three states, or gross, subtle, and causal. Next are five states, or gross, subtle, causal, witnessing, and non-dual. Then we have four states, or gross, subtle, causal, and non-dual, with witnessing being an aspect of causal. While there's only one natural state spectrum, it's worked with or understood in two ways. Natural states are primordial realms of experience that are the containers or openings which structures fill with content. Natural states are also understood as state stages or the path of stabilizing wakefulness at higher and higher states as the self engages in contemplative practice. With state stages, it is the self that is developing through states, which already exist. Any natural state can be experienced through a brief and temporary glimpse or peak experience from virtually any structure of consciousness. You can have a peak experience in the gross waking state. Let's say you're walking in nature and you have a peak experience of being one with all of the natural world. This is called nature mysticism. You can have a peak experience of the subtle state. You might be dreaming of a great cloud of luminous, radiant love, and you might even feel that you're becoming one with that infinite love. This is called deity mysticism. In reference to the dreamless sleep, or causal state, it's also possible to have a peak experience of formless emptiness. Many spiritual or religious experiences are described as empty, formless, or unmanifest, the void, abyss, the ground of being, and so on. Experiences like this are called formless mysticism. Peak experiences of the non-dual state are quite common, showing up as radically ordinary flow-like experiences where you are not separate from, or you are united with, everything arising in all the other states. This is called non-dual mysticism. First spotted by Ken Wilber and Wilber-Combs, the Wilber-Combs lattice is a matrix of different state experiences interpreted through structures. The states are aligned across the top, and some version of the vertical spiral of development along the left, and each intersection represents a distinct type of interpreted state experience. First spotted by Ken Wilber and Wilber-Combs. When working with states in a developmental sense, they are called state stages. This is a horizontal movement of the self through stabilization of access to states beyond gross. The states determine the realm of experience or the container. Structure stages are the emerging levels of individual consciousness. Structures fill the container of states with content, and they provide for interpretation of state-determined phenomena and experience. There are two spectrums available for human development: a vertical spectrum through structure stages and a horizontal spectrum through state stages. In each of these spectrums, individuals have a center of gravity. This leads to a dual self-sense made up of a structure self and a state self. Switch points, just like fulcrums, unfold in a three-phase process of identification, differentiation, and integration. Problems can occur in any of the three switch point phases. Two general pathologies result: allergies or repression of the previous state stage, or addictions, which are fixations or obsessions with the current, past, or emerging state stage. The question, "What is spiritual?" has 5 distinct meanings, which can be understood through the lens of each aqual element. These include the highest stages in any line, a separate line itself, a type of attitude or openness, a peak experience of a high state, or an individual quadrant or face of the divine. Each of these are right. The point is to make sure that you identify what meaning you're employing when speaking of spirituality. Freedom and fullness, or being and becoming, are the path towards more complex development in both the state stage and the structure stage spectrums. The first could be considered the path of waking up, and the second the path of growing up. Taken together, they are the 2 breaths or movements of human development.
We are here to discuss states of consciousness, and states are one of the 5 main elements in the aqual framework. States are well known to the contemplative traditions, and as a matter of fact, many of the contemplative traditions, including Vedanta, Hinduism, and Tibetan Buddhism, maintain that there are at least 3 dimensions or 3 aspects that you need in order to understand consciousness. And these are referred to as states of consciousness, sheaths of consciousness, and bodies. And both Vedanta and Tibetan Buddhism talk about 3, 4, or 5 natural states of consciousness, along with 5 sheaths and 3 bodies. And anything less than that is maintained, doesn't cover all of the bases that you need to understand in understanding consciousness and meditation and development, reality, and so on. So a lot of the teachers who are borrowing from the Eastern tradition often just use one or at most two of these dimensions. And so they're really giving kind of a partial, truncated view of the great Eastern esoteric and Western esoteric traditions. The states of consciousness, all human beings it's maintained, have 4 or 5 major states of consciousness. And these are waking state, the dream state, the deep, dreamless state, then a 4th state, which is pure, unqualifiable, empty awareness, or sometimes it's referred to as the witness or witnessing. And then the 5th state. And the 4th state, Sanskrit for 4th, is simply the word Turiya. And this is often referred to as the Turiya state. And then the 5th state is Turiyatita. And that is the pure, ultimate, non-dual state. A state which is the union of Turiya, or emptiness, with gross, subtle, and causal, or waking, dream, and deep sleep, are the worlds of form. The union of emptiness and form is Turiyatita. So these states are correlated with sheaths, and sheaths are the closest thing that the esoteric traditions have to structures. And sheaths are in both Vedanta and Vajrayana. There are 5 major sheaths, and these sheaths are like coverings over the pure self, or Turiya, much like an onion. And these sheaths are the Annamaya Kosha, the Pranamaya Kosha, the Manomaya Kosha, the Vijnanamaya Kosha, and the Anandamaya Kosha. And those are increasingly subtler and subtler and subtler coverings, layers of reality that surround and are in fact manifestations of the self, of Turiya. So these are both the manifest forms of reality, the levels of reality that are manifest by Brahmanatman or by Godhead. And they also, if they're not seen as manifestations of the ultimate, then they become the stuff of Maya. They're illusory. They're the things that hide our realization of the supreme identity, our oneness with the ultimate one true self. The sheaths are, all of them have the phrase Maya Kosha. And Kosha is the word for sheath, and Maya is the word for made of. And made of, Maya, is the same word that is used to describe the manifest world as being Brahman's or Buddha mind's Maya. It's creative construction. And again, that is a creative construction or manifestation or creativity if we see it as the activity of spirit. And if not, it's those manifestations that hide our realization, that hide our understanding of being one with Godhead, one with the ultimate reality. The first sheath, Annamaya Kosha, means sheath made of Anna, which is food. So this is the material level, the material sheath. And it is the lowest level, the densest level, and itself is a sensory-motor world and corresponds with the waking state. So what defines being in a waking state is that you can see the sensorimotor world. In the dream state, or in states of meditation, or in the causal state, or in deep dreamless sleep, you cannot see the sensorimotor world. You can't see the Anamaya Kosha. So that is a defining characteristic of the waking state, is that the sensorimotor world is present. Whatever else is present, sensorimotor world is present. Rocks, trees, mountains, towns, Gaia, rivers, lakes, are all have this material component, this component of form, that is the Anamaya Kosha. And then next up, the Pranamaya Kosha. Prana is the word for bioenergy, or libido, or elan vital. And it's the sheath that emerges with the emergence of life forms and is present throughout all living things. And in Western terms, it would constitute a fifth force of nature, with the waking sensorimotor world having four major forces: strong, weak, nuclear, electromagnetic, gravitational. This fifth force would be a bioenergy, and is the force that drives all living things, and is the first to be supported not by just a gross body, which the waking state and the Anamaya Kosha are supported by the first of three major bodies, the gross body. And the gross body is simply the physical sensorimotor body that you see when you're awake. And when you dream, you don't have a gross body. When you dream, all that you have is a body made of light or images, luminosity, emotions, feelings, and so on. This is, phenomenologically, this is the subtle body. So the subtle body is said to support this whole intermediate range of states and sheaths. It supports the dream state. But in the dream state, you can have at least three different sheaths arising. The sheath made of prana, or bioenergy, or emotional sexual energy. The next sheath, which is the Maya Kosha. Mono means mind. It's a sheath made of mind, ideas, thoughts, images. And Vijnana, which is higher mind. All three of those structures can appear in the dream state. And all three of those structures are supported by the subtle body. So the dream state, as one of the 4 or 5 major waking states, the dream state doesn't refer to just dreaming. It refers to states of meditation. It refers to states of visualization, states of creativity, anything that isn't a mere reflection of the sensorimotor world. And that would be waking. The waking state is what does that. So the dream state is also the state that, if you believe in it, in reincarnation, is the Bardo realm, is the realm in which the individual self transmigrates from one lifetime to the next lifetime to the next lifetime. And one of the reasons for practicing dream yoga while you're alive and being able to enter dreams with lucid awareness and to control dreaming while the dream is arising is that if you can control the dream state while you're alive, you can then control the Bardo state when you die. And so you can literally navigate the Bardo state, the Bardo realm, which is where these 3 major states are presented to you one after another. And if you can recognize those and know how to control them, then you can literally select your rebirth. So if you buy reincarnation, that's one of the main reasons to do dream yoga. But the essential point is that the dream state doesn't apply to just states that you have while you're literally dreaming. It applies to states while you're awake that are also dreamlike, visualizations, creativity, bardo realms, states of meditation with form, and so on. Those are all part of the, quote, dream state, and are all supported by the subtle body. Now, because terms are hard to come by as we Westerners translate these various dimensions, we're sort of short on virtually all terms for transpersonal structures, and a lot of the terms for some of these dimensions that Western psychology doesn't recognize as well as it should, such as states of consciousness. So sometimes we use the terms gross, subtle, and causal, which actually refer to three bodies. We use gross, subtle, and causal to refer to the general consciousness supported by those bodies. So waking state will also refer to as the gross state of consciousness. And the dream state will also refer to as the subtle state of consciousness. And the deep dreamless state will also refer to as the causal state of consciousness. Although technically, gross, subtle, and causal applies to the concrete matter-energy supports of consciousness. So the next highest sheath after the monomycosia being the sheath made of mind, and it really applies to the lower mind, sort of first tier thoughts and images and concepts. And then the one above that is the Vijnana-maya-kosha, and this is the highest of the dream or subtle states, and it refers to just the higher mind, and is essentially similar to second tier thinking. It's higher, integral, holistic thoughts and images and concepts, and is sort of the highest of the purely mental structures. And it again is supported by a subtle body. Then we move into the third major natural state, along with its structures and its bodies. And the third state is the deep, dreamless sleep state. And just like the dream state doesn't refer to things that only happen while you sleep, the deep, dreamless state doesn't refer to things that happen to you only while you sleep, although primarily it is the state of deep, formless sleep that everybody enters several times a night. So we're seeing that in a 24-hour period, every sentient being runs through all three of these major states. Runs through waking state, runs through dream state, runs through deep dreamless state. So we have access to all of these natural states of consciousness at any age. And this is one of the main reasons that states of consciousness can be experienced at any stage or structure of consciousness. The deep dreamless state also refers to essentially any formless state that occurs during waking. And that can include just aspects of awareness that don't particularly have any structure or form as they arise. It particularly refers to states of meditation without form, so-called nirvikalpa states or nirvanic states. These are states that essentially have no developed form. Now, at this point, it always gets a little bit confusing because there are two more states to give 5 states altogether. And the definition of causal tends to change based on how many other states are being included in the system that's presenting it. And so I'll come back to that in a minute after I finish the other two states. The fourth state, the structure, the last and highest structure that goes with the deep dreamless state is the Anandamaya Kosha. And that means the sheath made of bliss. And for bliss is really just one of several terms that means the subtlest forms of manifestation. Bliss being sort of the subtlest emotional experience that you can have. But other terms could be used as well, because what the causal state is, in its technically correct form, where it's the third of 5 states, is its subtlest state of manifestation. So the fourth state, Turiya, is purely radically unmanifest, truly and literally formless, pure emptiness, pure witnessing awareness without any qualities or without any form at all. And as the manifest world arises, there are things that arise first. Very subtle shapes, very subtle sounds, very subtle luminosities, and very subtle qualities. And these are taken to be generically divine forms. They are forms of Saguna Brahman with qualities. And these qualities are what appear in the causal realm. Again, in a very, very subtle way. The Tibetans actually refer to the causal as the very subtle. So they have gross, subtle, and very subtle. And the Hindus refer to it as gross, subtle, and causal. Causal because these forms are the forms on which the rest of manifestation is hung. And this is the technically correct meaning of the word archetype. Archetype means primary, original, or fundamental pattern. And it's the pattern on which all other patterns are hung. So it's not in the Jungian sense. The Jungian sense, the Jungian archetype occurs lower down the spectrum and really is sort of some of the earliest forms in evolution back to source. And so the early magic and mythic forms that we find universally, those are Jungian archetypes. These are archetypes in a truly Platonic sense, in a Vedantic sense, in a Plotinist sense, which is if you are in a state of unmanifest meditation or absorption and you start to come out of that state, the first things you see are archetypes. The first subtle sounds you hear, the first subtle sights you see, the first subtle feelings that you have. And these are all in the causal state, because then as manifestation continues, it will be, in a sense, these archetypal forms continuing to crystallize into denser and denser and denser patterns, going through subtle and then down to gross. And there's sort of lines going through the whole sequence, so that material qualities in the gross sensorimotor domain have their corresponding patterns all the way up in the causal. So any sort of energy or vibration in the gross realm is just the densest form of a vibration that started in the causal state and precipitated downward through involution to continue to produce these states of manifestation. those three realms in particular, the gross, the subtle, and causal, are the stuff of manifestation. So that all objects that are arising, or that you're feeling, or that you can interiorly see, or feel, or notice, are either gross objects, or subtle objects, or causal objects. And again, each one of them is supported by a particular energy. A gross body energy, a subtle body energy, and a causal body energy. Which is a very clever way to handle the mind-body problem. So it's every mind has a body. So every waking state, gross mind has a gross body. And every subtle emotional, mental state has a subtle body, subtle energy supporting it. And every causal awareness, image, thought, has a causal body supporting it. So it's really that there's a gross body mind, a subtle body mind, and a causal body mind. And so you don't get this mind-body duality that you are stuck with in the West. The fifth state is Turyatita, and it's the ultimate state, non-dual state of suchness. And it's when the state of Turya, or pure emptiness, pure awareness without qualities, becomes one with everything that is witnessed. It's where the mirror mind collapses into all of the objects that it's reflected. It's where emptiness and form are realized to be not two. It's where nirvana and samsara are realized to be one. And this is an ever-present condition, ever-present state that is, for various reasons, simply not recognized, not noticed. And paths of great liberation are ways to recognize this one taste, to recognize that what you take to be this interior seer, thinker, feeler is actually the author of the entire manifest world. And you are one with that entire world. And this goes through all of the states. So you have, looking at all five states and the bodies that go with them, you have the gross waking state, sensory motor world. Next up is the dream state, or the subtle state with its subtle body. And next up is the deep formless state, the causal state with its causal body. And then the fourth state is Turya, which is free of all of these objects and is itself pure unmanifest awareness. Radically empty, open mind. And then the fifth is Turyatita, which is the union of that radically open mind with all objects, gross, subtle, and causal. Now, when four states are included, well, let me start and say first, it's most common for many of the traditions, to just use gross, subtle, and causal. And this is the doctrine of the Trikaya, the three bodies of Buddha, and those are the Nirmanakaya, which is the gross body, the Sambhogakaya, which is the subtle body, and the Dharmakaya, which is the causal body. And when just three bodies and states are used, then the causal body, the Dharmakaya, tends to mean the other two states as well. So it can be used meaning both the subtlest forms of manifestation. More often it means pure emptiness. And then sometimes it will mean non-dual suchness. But it's very, very common to find just these three. And there's this sort of body, mind, and spirit. And without looking at these fine distinctions at the upper level. But when you do introduce 4 states, then generally what's introduced is Turiya. And it is then given a body of its own. And that's called the Swabhavika. So 4 states, 4 bodies. And the bodies being Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, Dharmakaya, and Swabhavika. And Turiya, then, since there's still a technically fifth state running around out there, Turiya then, or the Swabhavika, then often means one or both of those two. So it can mean just the pure absolute subjectivity, pure witnessing awareness, or it can mean suchness, non-dual awareness, radical unity. And finally, sometimes the fifth state is separated out. And both Vedanta and Vajrayana have all 5 states included. It's just they don't always refer to all 5. They most often refer to just 3. But the fifth that they both have is Turiyatita, and then it's given its own body. And the body is known either as the Jnana Kaya, J-N-A-N-A, Jnana meaning wisdom. The J-N-A in Sanskrit is the same in Western languages as G-N-O. And G-N-O or K-N-O means things like knowledge or gnosis. And that's what jhana is non-dual knowledge, non-dual awareness. And so the Jnana Kaya, or just the Vajrakaya, the diamond body. So here we have these 3, 4, or 5 states of consciousness, each of which is supported by a particular body, a particular concrete matter energy. And in integral theory, this is the upper left quadrant and the upper right quadrant. States of consciousness are in the upper left, the interior of the individual, and their energies, the actual concrete manifest forms, are in the upper right. And just as there's a spectrum of consciousness in the upper left, there's a spectrum of energy in the upper right. That spectrum of energy goes from gross forms of energy to subtle forms of energy to causal forms. And there is a way to connect that spectrum of subtle energy with Western evolutionary science. And that's by seeing that in the tree of life, the evolutionary unfolding of life, that the greater the complexity of life form that emerges, then the subtler the energy that goes with it. And so you can actually trace the emergence of these subtle energies, even though Western science doesn't recognize them. They actually fit quite well with the evolutionary unfolding of life forms as Western science has explained it. So if you look at from the Big Bang forward, if you look at the material realm, it has 4 forces. Again, strong and weak, nuclear, electromagnetic, and gravitational. And those forces are found in all insentient holons or entities. And as soon as you find a living form emerge, the first viruses and bacteria, you find the emergence of a subtle body and a subtle energy. And these are sometimes broken down into terms like etheric and astral and so on. But the point is, as soon as the life form emerges, a corresponding energy emerges with it. And as soon as the mind emerges, a corresponding subtle energy emerges with that. As soon as the triune brain emerges, another subtler energy emerges with that. So these are held to be very real bodies or matter energy occurrences. And they are the support and the transmission, the carrier of types of consciousness. And that also includes the sheaths of consciousness, which are structures of consciousness and also go with states in the upper left quadrant. So the AQUIL framework includes these states of consciousness, these structures of consciousness, and these bodies of consciousness. States are very important because they set the actual orientation and generalized form of consciousness that a person is experiencing in any given moment. Whereas the actual content of those states is provided by the structures. So an infant age 6 months old is going to have all 5 of these states of consciousness available to it because it wakes, dreams, and sleeps. But the content of a 6-month is not going to be much higher than the content provided by the Annamaya Kosha and the Pranamaya Kosha. In other words, by infrared and at most a little bit of magenta structures will be the only content that a 6-month-old has going through his or her awareness, even though it's experiencing these states. But it's experiencing these states largely devoid of specific content. So as the child grows and more sheaths or structures emerge and start providing content, the more it goes into rad structures or magical structures of consciousness, the more it goes into mythic structures of consciousness. If you take an infant 6 years old whose center of gravity is mythic, and then you look at their dream states, they'll be almost entirely mythic structures. The content will be mythic. There will be no rational thought going on in the dream state, and no second tier thinking going on in the dream state, and no third tier thinking going on in the dream state. It will just be this magic and mythic structures occurring. You wake an adult up at whose center of gravity is green, and the structure of their dreams, same dream state as the infant and the 6-year-old, will have a different content. Its content, although it will reach back in some cases to mythic structures, because it's already transcended and included that level. And so mythic structures are still sort of laying around the basement. But it will mostly be dream occurring in green structures. And if you wake somebody up like that, even if they're having dreams of very sharp luminosity and a great deal of even mythic-like content, the majority of dreams of adults, again, when you wake them up and ask them, are things like, well, I was thinking about going grocery shopping tomorrow, and I have to drop the kids at school, and that's the content of most dream states. Except again for some of these big dreams, and these big dreams move outside of your typical ordinary type of thinking, and can include to some degree pre-center of gravity images, magic imagery and mythic imagery, and sometimes a higher state or stage of structure can be introduced. But these states then are important because they do set the general orientation that you have. Are you oriented towards an essentially gross realm? And if so, that means that you pay little attention to interiors. You probably don't believe that they're very real. They're just sort of passing fantasies and have no real scientific evidence. They're just an interior sort of black box. And you are oriented towards the hard realities of the sensory-motor world. And that center of gravity is your center of gravity as far as states are concerned. And that can happen no matter what structure you're at. Because one of the things that we've learned is that these structures and states are relatively independent. And so you can develop along two developmental sequences. One is the sequences of states, and one is the sequences of structures. And this is really important because it allows us to actually track how people can make profound progress in one of these lines and not progress in the other line. And the difference is that what happens with development in structures is that you are adding perspectives and adding dimensions to the manifest world. How much of the manifest world you can see and embrace and identify with. Whereas development through states, which means something very specific that I'll talk about in just a second, is how much of the manifest world you can disidentify with. So it's how much you can be free of the manifest world. Starting out with wakefulness confined, wakefulness capital W, meaning your pure ultimate self, your pure awareness, starts out confined in the waking state, small w waking state. And so the only world it's really aware of with any degree of detail is the sensory motor world. As either through natural occurrences or as accelerated by taking up meditation, as wakefulness moves from the waking state into the dream state, then that means that all of a sudden the entire dimensionality of the dream world comes into focus. And it's something you can see. It's something you become very much aware of. And you become disidentified with the merely gross realm. That's simply a series of objects that are now, in a certain sense, exterior to you. Meaning not that you're dissociated, but that you're no longer merely identified with them. And so as your center of gravity moves into the dream state, you might likely begin to do things like lucid dream. And whether you do that or whether simply the whole interior world starts to open up to you and you start to notice it, you start to become aware of it, what's happening is that wakefulness has moved from the waking state into the dream state. And so you have a whole new world that's opened up. If development continues into the causal, then one of the things that can happen is at night during the sleep cycle, you might be aware, just as you're lucid dreaming, you might be aware as you pass into deep dreamless sleep. And there's a very subtle thread of awareness that passes into the deep state. And that is moving into having awareness be resurrected as emptiness, getting in touch with that which is formless, that which is free of identification with any objects at all. And that is technically the nirvanic state, using just these three states. If we use four states, then moving into Turiya is moving into pure emptiness. And if we want to use that, then that's the next stage in the development of state unfolding. And those 4 states of unfolding are essentially the 4 major stages of meditation that we find if cross-culturally. So Evelyn Underhill, for example, in her book Mysticism, summarized the 4 major stages of development in Western mysticism as purification, which is purifying the gross body, into illumination, which is moving into the dream state of luminosity and blissful awareness and strong visions and a great deal of luminous awareness. And then the third she called dark night, which is moving into the causal, empty, darkness, but nothing manifesting at all. And then into the 4th and final stage of unification, which is Turiya and Turiyatita, which is coming out of dark night, out of emptiness, and identifying with gross, subtle, and causal objects. And so what that means, though, is that what you've done is become free of identifying with any of these dimensions on their own. You're no longer merely identified with gross objects. You're no longer merely identified with subtle objects. You're no longer merely identified with causal objects. You are, in fact, free of identification with any and all manifestation. And so this is the pure state of nete, not this, not that. Pure, radical freedom, untouched by being chained to any object at all. And that freedom is the flip side of a fullness that also comes with the fact that you can, while not being exclusively identified with any object, you have an identity with all of them. So you are identified with all gross, subtle, and causal objects. And that's the state of Turiyatita. And that's sort of the ultimate conclusion of the contemplative or meditative stage sequence. And not many people ordinarily have those experiences unless they take up meditation. Because ordinarily, you don't push into these states of consciousness with awareness. That very few people push into the dream state and attempt lucid dreaming, let alone push into deep formless states and attempt to have experiences of nirvikalpa samadhi, or experiences of I am in Kabbalah. Whereas everybody goes through structures or sheaths. Everybody develops through these structured levels of consciousness, because those are the means of growing up. Those are the means that we actually incorporate the history of spirits unfolding in the human realm. And that goes from, to give names to some of these sheaths, some of the worldviews that they give rise to, the archaic worldview, to the magic worldview, to the mythic worldview, to the rational worldview, to the pluralistic worldview, to the integral worldview, and higher. And these are the stages that everybody grows up in. It's the process of growing up. Whereas moving through states is the process of becoming free, of freeing up, of becoming free from an identification with any particular arising world. So most of the practices that you will get for spiritual training will consist one way or another in working with one or more of these states of consciousness. And so even working with, let's say, the power of now, is working with Turiya, with just being present as the present witness to the present moment. And that is pure witnessing. And that is something that, whether we know it or not, is happening anyway. The pure witness is ever present. It's right now you see objects floating through your visual field, and you hear sounds floating through your auditory field. You can hear me talking spontaneously and without effort. You witness the world arising. And that witnessing is Turiya, is the pure, true self. And it's something that you are never without. It's something that is already spontaneously and freely happening. And so it's not a matter of trying to bring something into existence. It's a matter of simply recognizing what is already happening. And so the practice of most forms of sitting meditation and meditation without form, practicing the power of the now, these are simply sitting as the witness, as bare attention, and witnessing what's arising moment to moment to moment. Because as you witness an object, you become free of it. That which is witnessed is something that you are no longer identified with. That which you witness is something that you have let go of in terms of being stuck to it or embedded in it. And the path of witnessing, even though you can recognize the witness right now, you are fully, completely aware of the witness right now. In order to have your center of gravity actually shift permanently to that witnessing, it's going to travel through these other three states. It's going to travel through the gross state. And so when you start witnessing, the first thing that you'll normally see are sensory motor objects. You'll see material objects in the world out there. You'll see mountains, clouds, trees, your own physical body. As you start to introspect, you'll see thoughts and ideas and images reflecting the sensory motor world. The more you continue witnessing, the more you continue just resting in the present, resting in the present moment, and witnessing what's arising, then the more you'll start to see subtle objects. And these are objects that are of greater intensity. They can be very state emotions that are very blissful, very joyous, very loving, very intensely caring. Of course, they can also be negative. They can be very fearful or anxious. But they don't necessarily hook in with the sensory motor world at that moment. They're starting to transcend it. They're starting to be part of a subtle dimension that isn't found in the exterior, gross, physical, sensory motor world. And that subtle dimension will go all the way into higher mind. And so as you continue to witness, more and more of these subtler and subtler objects will come into your awareness. And the more you're aware of them, the more you become free of them. So they were lying back there and part of your sort of subjective unknown identity until you turn the flashlight on them and start to bring awareness to them. And then that shakes them loose, that disembeds them from your identity and has them arising as objects. And then the same thing, if you continue witnessing, the same thing will happen as you move into the causal domain. And there, it's objects are either stopping to arise at all, and all you'll experience is a sense of vast openness. When you are attempting to get in touch with the causal as pure emptiness, as Turiya, as the pure witness. When you actually look for this witness, it's nothing that you'll see. So because anything that you can see will be an object. And the pure witness is not an object. It's a pure subject. It's pure awareness that can never be an object. So you can notice that I have feelings, but I am not my feelings. I am that awareness. I have thoughts, but I am not my thoughts. I have sensations, but I am not my sensations. See objects, I am not those objects. I am pure awareness of all of those. And so what will start to happen is I won't see anything, but I will start to feel a sense of freedom. So I have this body, but I am not this body. I have this mind, I am not this mind. All I am is this vast sense of freedom from them. Because I'm not stuck to them. I'm not identified with them. I'm not anchored in them. And so this pure awareness, which is the causal considered as pure awareness, or technically Turiya, the fourth, pure, true self, is Zen master Shibayama actually calls it absolute subjectivity. And even though it can't really be qualified technically like that, it gets the point across. It's that which is this absolute subject that you can never see. And if you look within to see it, all you'll see is another object. And so if you look within to see what's seeing that, all you'll see is another object. You are none of those objects. You're not a causal object. You're not a subtle object. You're not a gross object. You're the real seer of those objects. And that seer is itself just vast freedom. Vast, open, empty awareness. And as you recognize that true sense of I amness, Zen calls it body-mind dropped. And your whole sense of identifying with a body or a mind simply drops. And you are this vast field of open, transparent, empty awareness in which everything is arising. And you are none of it. You are radically free of all of that. And so the development through states of consciousness is a development towards this freedom of being radically disidentified with everything that's arising. Whereas development through structures is a way of increasing identification with the manifest realm and being able to find more and more and more perspectives that you're at home with, going from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric to cosmocentric. And it's in a sense, they come together with Turiyatita, which is full non-duality. And again, that's when you are sitting as a pure witness. And for the witness, things always appear in front. So whenever you're witnessing, objects that are arising will appear to arise in front of the witness. And so if you're witnessing a mountain, the mountain is arising in front of you. That's the orientation you have to it. If you're doing a series of mathematical equations, those mathematical equations appear in front of you. With non-duality, that whole frontness disappears. And all of a sudden, you are not looking at the mountain. You are the mountain. This division between this side of your face and that side of your face, the world out there, it completely drops. And you're actually touching everything that you're aware of. It becomes one taste. Trungpa Rinpoche once said, it's like the sky turns into a big blue pancake and falls on your head. And all that means is the separation between you and the sky disappears. And it's like it's sitting right on top of your head right now. So everything you see out there, you actually don't have a head. Just everything is arising moment to moment where you thought your head was. You have no head. There's no self. There's just what's arising moment to moment to moment. And what your head feels like is whatever you see out there. So all of a sudden that subject-object duality collapses. And all that's in its place is the entire manifest world, arising as you, arising where you thought your head was, and arising as a texture of your own I amness. And so these 4 or 5 states are also the generalized course that virtually every major path of meditation follows. It starts with being aware of gross objects. Those eventually become subtle objects, and then usually at that time, streams of luminosity start to appear. Many of the meditation traditions start working with that light, even identifying it as a form of divine light. That continues until you get into states where there's such silence and such quiet that nothing appears to arise at all. And yet there's a subtle, tacit awareness of that vast nothingness. And a vast, vast, infinite freedom. But nothing that can be seen, really, or touched, per se, except this tacit feeling of radical freedom and radical openness, with nothing arising. And then, as you come out of that nothing, because it's in that state that the self-contraction itself finally dissolves. Because like everything else in the manifest world, the self-contraction starts in the causal domain. So it's a contraction around the heart. The causal body is often identified with the heart on the right side of the chest. So you have 3 hearts. The heart on the left side of the chest is your gross heart. The heart in the middle of your chest is the subtle chakra heart. And then 2 fingers to the right of that is the causal empty heart. And Ramana Maharshi and Adida and several others maintain that when you do inquiry, like who am I, you can actually feel a subtle vibration on the right side. And whether you feel that or not, the point is that it's often given a generalized quote location in that vicinity. And that's also where the self-contraction first arises. Because what happens is that the causal domain itself, when it emerges first, the beginning of involution, if you don't stay in the state of Turiya or Godhead or I am or openness or emptiness, then you will start to identify with the causal domain. And so you will have a subtle distinction between subject and object. And therefore you will be not the true self, not the capital T, capital S, true self, or big mind, or soul identified with Godhead, but soul separate from God. A separate self-sense arises around the heart. And that is a self-contraction, just like making a fist, because it is a contracting away from the fullness of infinity to a particular identification with a finite self. And that takes energy. It takes a causal, very subtle energy to continue to contract away from what you truly are, and to continue to contract around an individual body-mind. And yet that's what happens with the rise of the causal in this reverse process, where the world is created by going from pure emptiness with a big bang into causal, into subtle, into gross. And then there, wakefulness gets trapped in the lowest gross domain until you work it back. Awakening wakefulness, so it penetrates the subtle, penetrates the causal, returns to its own formless, radical, empty state. But throughout that voyage, what keeps you from recognizing the true self is your false self, your small self, your finite self, your self-contraction. And the self-contraction is the greatest at the lowest structure and the lowest state. So it's the greatest at the Annamaya kosha, or at the infrared structure, and in the gross state. And as structures grow and develop, as you grow up, you increase the number of perspectives that you have available to you, and self-contraction relaxes into those greater perspectives. And so the capacity for the self to love increases and increases and increases. So you might remember Carol Gilligan's 4 stages of care that she outlined for female moral development. The first stage was selfish, merely a first-person perspective, the self-contraction at its height. You can only see and care about yourself. The next stage she called care, because you can start to care for an individual other than yourself. And this can mean you start to care for your family, or maybe your whole tribe, possibly even your whole nation. But your self-contraction has relaxed, and therefore more love can get out of the heart and into your manifest world. And so your capacity for care and love and compassion expands from egocentric to ethnocentric. And that's the stage she called care. The third stage he called universal care. And that means that you can care for all human beings, regardless of race, color, sex, or creed. That's a third-person perspective, orange altitude, beginning of world-centric, post-conventional stages of morality. And it means that, again, the self-contraction is relaxed. And therefore more love and care can pass through your body, can actually be conducted through your body with subtler levels of energy carrying it. And then her highest stage she called integrated. And that represents second tier and higher, where the masculine and feminine forms of care are finally brought together. There's a consciousness big enough to include them both. And so that's another expansion of care and compassion, and another relaxation of the self-contraction. And we see the same thing happening moving through states, with the self-contraction relaxing as it goes from gross to subtle to causal to non-dual. And it is only at non-dual that self-contraction fully and freely releases. And then your fundamental sense of identity reverts to this ever-present I amness, this ever-present sense of self that's not tied to your body-mind, but is a sense of infinite freedom, infinite awareness, infinite joy. And what's so interesting is that those states of consciousness, remember the content, the interpretation, is provided by your structure of consciousness. We looked at how the dream state changes from a 6-month-old to a 6-year-old to an adult. One of the recent discoveries we found, which is very, very, very important, is that each of these stages of meditation, going from gross to subtle to causal to non-dual, gets its interpretation through the altitude or structure that you're at while you're going through these states. So there is literally a red version of experiencing these states. There's an amber version of experiencing these states. There's an orange version of experiencing these states. There's a green version of experiencing these states, turquoise version, and so on. And that's very, very important, because just the fact that you have your state development all the way to non-dual doesn't mean that your perspectives are fully developed. You can have mystics that are fully developed and are at the mythic membership amber stage of development, and yet their state of awareness is virtually full-time non-dual. But they will have a moral disposition that's amber. They will divide the world into those who understand and those who don't. And they will be condemnatory about those who don't have this wonderful understanding that they have on their path. And somebody who's at green, on the other hand, will tend to see everybody and will put emphasis on the equality of everybody, whether they're enlightened or not. And sometimes the green interpretation is so strong that somebody who's at non-dual awakened state will claim that awakening isn't important, because everybody is already equal. And to say that some people are awakened and some people aren't is to make a nasty ranking, a harsh judgment. And so they not only deny stages of development that get them up to green, they deny stages of development that get them enlightened. And caught in that double myth is somehow called spiritual. Big problem that we find going on all the time. So the point about looking at these states of consciousness is that in the West, as Western developmental psychology came into existence, what it measured is simply what it found. And what it found was people mostly in gross states of consciousness, occasionally subtle states. And so when they measured people's growth and development, what they found is people moving through these structures, archaic to magic to mythic to rational, pluralistic, and so on, entirely in a gross state orientation. And so you don't have any Western developmental psychologists at all talking about the stages of development you get if you go through states, because they just don't see that. It's extremely, extremely rare. It's extremely rare in the East. So, but it becomes important, of course, because it is the path of liberation. It's the path to ultimate freedom. It's the path to ultimately waking up. And so what we do is we take the developmental models from the West and we correlate their different stages, and we see them going through similar altitudes, and we include all of that on their psychograph. And all that is very, very important. But we add states, and we encourage state development. Because only by moving through these states, gross state, the subtle state, the causal state, the Turiya and Turiyatita, can you actually wake up to your ultimate and ever-present and true self, your true nature, your true reality, and not simply increase the number of perspectives you have in the illusory world, which is what Western development studies. So both of these are necessary. Both of these are very important. And for those who just do meditation, and many Buddhist teachers and many Neo-Vedanta teachers and so on are looking just at states, and they're pointing to the fact, for example, that the non-dual state, ever-present state, is in fact ever-present, that you don't have to do anything to contact it. All you have to do is rest in the natural state of the mind, just as it is right now, and you will be in the enlightened state. Simply do that randomly throughout the day until it becomes more and more obvious that this ever-present non-dual state of suchness is your true self. That's all you have to do. Everything else, not needed. Everything else is part of the illusory world. But that is, first of all, it's even from a mystic's point of view wrong. Because what the ultimate mystic point of view is, that which is emptiness is not other than form. That which is form is not other than emptiness. So this emptiness that you are all the time is also one with the world of form. And you are that. You are this world of form. So you have to identify with both in order to cover both truths. And if not, you can be perfectly aware of pure emptiness or non-dual suchness and actually be just at a red altitude of development or just at an amber ethnocentric level of development. When the book Zen at War came out, it shocked American Buddhists because these are some of the greatest Zen masters in the modern era, spouting deeply ethnocentric views. And they thought that's just not possible. Well, it is possible. State development and structure development are two different things, and you can do them independently of each other. And this is why there are so many mystics that, in fact, are ethnocentric, or patriarchal, or militaristic, or any number of conventional and even pre-conventional orientations. And yet they are one with the entire world of form that's arising. They are one with the entire manifest world. The problem is for them, the manifest world of form only goes up to amber. They can't see orange. They cannot see green. They cannot see teal. They cannot see turquoise. They cannot see indigo. That is, as Robert Keegan says, over our heads. So they're not really one with the entire universe because there are levels of development that they have not identified with. And so that's a huge, huge increase in our understanding of just what the mystical states are and how they fit into the rest of psychological development. And shows us why it's so very, very important to include states and state stages, as well as structures and structure stages in any integral point of view. And so that's why we talk about all quadrants, all levels, all lines, all states, and all types. Levels being structures and states being states. So keep in mind these 4 or 5 major states, the fact that they have corresponding bodies that go with them, the fact that you can develop them relatively independently from structures and structure stages, but that you want to be working on both sides of the street, both the structures, which is how you grow up, and the states, which is how you wake up. And anything that doesn't include both of those has got at most a partial enlightenment and at most a partial development. So that's why we are keen to keep all five of these elements in our awareness, and particularly include states of consciousness. 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 Consciousness.
States possess an interesting differentiation from the other elements of the integral map. This is not to insinuate that they're any more or less important, just that there's something subtly different about them. No other element seems to bridge the gap from the sacred to the mundane as much as states. No other element seems to so directly challenge our inclinations to just understand integral theory. What good is an understanding of our emotions if we can't work with them? What help is it to hear descriptions of non-dual experience if we don't know how to cultivate it experientially? States, to a degree greater than we've yet seen, demand us to engage in practice, to taste directly. Without a serious commitment to practice in several varieties, spiritual or contemplative, shadow or emotional, we will forever be trapped in our minds, struggling to make and hold these distinctions about realities that need to be experienced to be truly known. States are the first element to describe our first-person experience directly, creating the bridge between third-person descriptions and the direct knowing of the territory described by our integral map. May we let this call to practice, the meeting of third-person description and first-person experience, expand to include every aqual component and this entire course in general. May theory, application, and awareness come together as the foundation of your embodied integral life. This has been quite a journey. From quadrants to lines to levels and finally to states, you have traversed an undeniably vast territory of human experience. You've touched in with the hidden, dusty corners of your own psyche and dived deep into an exchanged experience with yourself, others, and the world at large. Only one more step is left on this leg of our journey through Aqual. One more step, and we round out this particular manifestation of the integral vision. From here, we turn to the final element called types, and to the final piece of the integral puzzle. Once types finds its place in our map, the grand tapestry of Aqual, weaving together the partial truths of every major approach, will come together as a complete map of the territory of your very own life and world.